Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into the strangest bedroom secret of the medieval world. Imagine this, you are a woman in the year 1300, lying in your bed at 9 in the evening. You close your eyes, drift into sleep, and then, just a few hours later, at midnight, your eyes open. Not because of a nightmare, not because of a crying baby, but because this is what your body expects. This is normal. You get up, walk through the darkness, tend the fire, maybe pray, maybe talk with your husband, and then, an hour or two later, you go back to bed for your second sleep. Does this sound strange? Does it sound impossible? Well, what if I told you that for thousands of years, this was how almost every woman on earth slept? And what if the way we sleep today, 8 hours straight through the night, is actually the weird part? So before we step into the medieval night together, I need to ask you something. If this story intrigues you, if you're curious about how women really lived in the past, would you take just a moment to subscribe to this channel and give this video a like? And hey, I am genuinely curious. Where are you right now as you listen to this? Are you in bed in the dark, maybe with a fan humming softly in the background? Are you in New York, California, Texas, or somewhere across the ocean? Drop a comment and let me know what time it is where you are. I love imagining all of you scattered across the world listening to the same story at different hours. Alright, now dim those lights if you have not already, get comfortable, and let us walk together into a medieval bedroom where sleep was nothing like you have ever known. Let me take you back to a cold winter night in the year 1280. You're a woman named Agnes, living in a small village in England. Your husband is a farmer. You have 3 children. Your home is a simple cottage, one room with a thatched roof and walls made of wattle and daub. There is a fire burning in the centre of the room, and smoke drifts up toward a hole in the ceiling. The sun went down hours ago, around 5 in the evening, and with no candles to spare, your family went to bed shortly after. You, your husband, and your children all lie together on a large straw mattress on the floor, huddled under wool blankets. You fall asleep quickly. The day was long. You worked in the fields, you cooked, you mended clothes, you cared for the animals. Your body is exhausted, and so you sleep deeply for about 4 hours. But then, around midnight, something shifts. Your eyes open. You're awake. Not startled, not frightened, just awake. This is your first sleep ending. Now, here is where it gets fascinating. You do not panic. You do not lie there frustrated, wondering why you cannot stay asleep, because this is not insomnia, this is not a problem. This is simply the way sleep works. You've been waking up like this since you were a child. Your mother woke up like this. Your grandmother woke up like this. Everyone you know wakes up like this. So what do you do during this strange, quiet hour between your first and second sleep? Well, that depends. Some nights you simply lie there in the darkness, listening to the sound of your husband breathing beside you, listening to the crackling of the dying fire. You think about your day. You think about your worries. You think about your dreams. This time, historians tell us, was considered sacred. It was called the watch, and during the watch your mind was clear, your thoughts were deep, and many people believed that the veil between the physical world and the spiritual world was thinner. Some women used this time to pray. In fact, the Catholic Church had a prayer specifically for this moment. It was called matins, and monks and nuns were required to wake up at this hour to sing and pray. But even lay people, ordinary women like Agnes, were encouraged to offer a short prayer during the watch. The prayer might be something simple. Lord, protect me through this night. Keep my children safe. Give me strength for tomorrow. It was a moment of spiritual communion in the deep silence of the night. Other women used the watch for more practical things. You might get up and walk carefully through the dark cottage to the fire. You would add a log or two, making sure the fire did not die completely, Because if it did, you would have to start it again in the morning, and that was hard work. You might use the chamber pot. You might check on your children, making sure they were still covered with their blankets. You might even wake your husband, and the two of you might talk quietly about the day ahead, about the work that needed to be done, about concerns or plans. And here is something that might surprise you. Some couples used this time for intimacy. Yes, you heard that right. Historians have found references in medieval texts suggesting that the watch was considered an ideal time for marital relations. Why? Because everyone else in the house was asleep. Because the world was quiet. Because there was a sense of privacy that did not exist during the busy, crowded day. But let me be clear about something. This was not just a medieval phenomenon. This two-sleep pattern, this biphasic sleep as scientists call it today, was the norm for almost all of human history. We have references to first sleep and second sleep in ancient Greek and Roman texts. We have references in African tribal cultures. We have references in pre-industrial Japan, in the Middle East, in indigenous American societies. Everywhere humans lived without electric lights, they slept this way. In fact, one of the most interesting studies on this was conducted in the 1990s by a psychiatrist named Thomas Ware. He wanted to know what would happen if you took modern people and removed all artificial light from their lives. So he brought a group of volunteers into a laboratory and exposed them to only 10 hours of light per day, simulating the natural light conditions of winter in medieval Europe. At first, the volunteers struggled. They were used to staying up late under electric lights, used to sleeping 8 hours straight. But within a few weeks, something remarkable happened. Their bodies began to shift. They started going to bed earlier, around 9 in the evening. They would sleep for about 4 hours, then wake up naturally around midnight or 1 in the morning. They would lie awake for an hour or two, not anxious, not frustrated, just peacefully awake, and then they would fall back asleep for another 3 or 4 hours until dawn. Ware discovered that during this wakeful period between sleeps, the volunteers experienced a unique state of consciousness. Their brains produced high levels of prolactin, a hormone associated with relaxation, creativity, and even spiritual feelings. Many of them described the experience as meditative, almost transcendent. They felt calm, reflective, deeply at peace. One volunteer said it was like being in a state between dreaming and waking, where thoughts flowed freely and insights came easily. This was not insomnia. This was the natural human sleep pattern, buried under centuries of electric lights and alarm clocks and 8-hour work schedules. Now, you might be wondering, when did this change? When did we stop sleeping in 2 phases and start sleeping in one long block? The answer is the Industrial Revolution. As factories emerged in the 18th and 19th centuries, the rhythm of life began to change. Artificial lighting became more common. First oil lamps, then gas lamps, then electric lights. Suddenly, people could stay awake longer into the night. They could work later. They could socialize later. The natural darkness that once signaled bedtime was pushed back. Later and later, work schedules also changed. Factory owners wanted workers to show up at the same time every morning and work for 8 or 10 or 12 hours straight. There was no room for waking up in the middle of the night and taking an hour to pray or reflect. Sleep became utilitarian. It became something you did to recharge your body for the next day of labor. The watch, that sacred time between sleeps, was seen as inefficient, unproductive, and so it disappeared. By the early 20th century, the idea of sleeping in 2 phases had been almost completely forgotten. Medical textbooks began to describe continuous 8-hour sleep as normal and healthy. Waking up in the middle of the night was labeled as insomnia, a disorder, something that needed to be fixed with pills or the therapy. The memory of biphasic sleep faded from our collective consciousness. But here is the irony. Today, millions of people, especially women, struggle with what they think is insomnia. They fall asleep fine, but then they wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and they cannot get back to sleep for an hour or more. They lie there frustrated, staring at the ceiling, wondering what is wrong with them. They visit doctors, they try sleeping pills, they feel broken. But what if nothing is wrong? What if their bodies are simply trying to return to the ancient pattern? What if that wakeful hour in the middle of the night is not a disorder, but a natural biological rhythm, buried deep in our genes, waiting to emerge when the conditions are right? I am not saying we should all go back to medieval sleeping patterns. I'm not saying you should start waking up at midnight every night, but I do think there is something profound here, something worth reflecting on. For medieval women, that hour between sleeps was a gift. It was a time to think, to pray, to connect with their deeper selves. It was a time when the world was silent and the mind was clear. In our modern world, we have lost that. We have lost the stillness. We have lost the darkness. We have filled every hour with light and noise and distraction. We treat sleep like a task to be completed efficiently, and when it does not go according to plan, we panic. But maybe, just maybe, the medieval women knew something we have forgotten. Maybe sleep is not supposed to be a straight line from bedtime to morning. Maybe it is supposed to have rhythms, pauses, moments of wakefulness. Maybe those moments are not interruptions but opportunities. Agnes, our medieval woman, did not know the science behind her sleep. She did not know about prolactin or REM cycles or circadian rhythms, but she knew in her bones that the watch was important. She knew that the hour between her first and second sleep was a time when her soul felt closest to God, when her mind felt most at peace, and when she finally drifted back into her second sleep around 2 or 3 in the morning, she slept deeply and dreamlessly until the first light of dawn. So tonight, if you find yourself waking in the middle of the night, do not fight it. Do not reach immediately for your phone or turn on a bright light. Instead, try to embrace it. Lie there in the quiet darkness. Let your thoughts wander. Breathe deeply. Maybe say a little prayer even if you are not religious. Maybe just acknowledge the stillness. You are not broken. You are not disordered. You are simply human, and your body remembers a time when the night was not something to conquer, but something to live within. And speaking of living within the medieval night, there is so much more to uncover, because once Agnes woke from her second sleep at dawn, she faced a world that was nothing like ours. The bedroom she slept in, the people she slept beside, the very bed beneath her body, all of it was stranger than you can imagine. In our next part, we are going to explore something that will probably shock you. Medieval women almost never slept alone. In fact, the idea of having your own bed, your own room, your own private space at night would have seemed absolutely bizarre to someone like Agnes. So who was sleeping next to her? Who else was in that bed? And what were the rules, the politics, the strange etiquette of shared sleeping in the medieval world? Stay with me, because what you're about to learn will change the way you think about privacy, intimacy, and the very meaning of a good night's rest. Picture this moment with me. It is a cold November evening in the year 1350, and you're getting ready for bed. But before you climb under those wool blankets, you need to know something crucial. Where exactly are you supposed to lie down? Because in the medieval world, your position in the bed was not random. It was not a matter of personal preference. No, your sleeping position was determined by a complex set of rules, by your age, by your gender, by your social status. The bed was not just a place to sleep. It was a political landscape, a social hierarchy made flesh and blankets. Let me introduce you to Margaret, a woman living in a modest but comfortable home in an English market town. She is 32 years old, married to a wool merchant named Thomas, and they have 4 children, 2 daughters aged 14 and 10, and 2 sons aged 8 and 5. Margaret's family is not wealthy enough to afford multiple bedrooms. In fact, the very concept of a bedroom, a room used only for sleeping, would seem absurdly wasteful to her. Space is precious. Every room must serve multiple purposes, so where does everyone sleep? Well, Margaret and Thomas have a proper bed, a wooden frame with a mattress stuffed with wool and straw, maybe even a few feathers if they have been fortunate. This bed is enormous by our standards, perhaps 6 or 7 feet wide. It needs to be because it is not just for the 2 of them. Now, here is where it gets interesting. When bedtime arrives, there is a very specific order to how everyone arranges themselves. The oldest daughter, 14-year-old Alice, climbs into bed first. She positions herself against the wall. This is not accidental. The wall is the safest spot, the most protected position. Young unmarried women, especially those approaching marriageable age, were considered vulnerable, precious, in need of protection. So Alice goes against the wall. Next comes her younger sister, 10-year-old Emma. She lies down beside Alice. Then Margaret herself climbs in, positioning herself between her daughters and her husband. Thomas gets in next, and finally the 2 boys lie down on the outer edge, with the youngest boy on the very outside edge of the bed, closest to the open room. Can you imagine this? 7 people in one bed. And this was not considered crowded or strange. This was normal. This was how families slept. But wait, there is more. Let us say a traveller arrives at the door just as the family is preparing for bed. Perhaps he is a merchant friend of Thomas, passing through town. In the medieval world, hospitality was not just a nice gesture, it was a sacred duty. Turning away a traveller, especially at night when roads were dangerous, was considered deeply shameful. So Thomas invites the man to stay the night. And where does this guest sleep? You guessed it. In the bed, with everyone else. The guest would typically be positioned on the outer edge near the boys, or sometimes given a spot of honour closer to the centre if he was a person of high status. No one thought this was weird. No one felt uncomfortable. The idea that you might need privacy while sleeping, that you might want to sleep alone, simply did not exist. Now I know what you're thinking. What about, intimate moments between husband and wife? How did that work with a bed full of children and possibly a guest or 2? Well, here is something that might surprise you even more. Privacy, as we understand it today, was not a concept that medieval people valued or even understood. The word privacy itself did not have the same meaning. Intimacy between married couples was not seen as something that required complete solitude. Remember, these families lived in 1 or 2 room homes. Everything happened in front of everyone. Cooking, eating, arguing, working, praying, and yes, even marital relations. Children grew up understanding that this was part of adult life. It was not hidden, not shameful, just a fact of existence. There are records from medieval courts where neighbours testified to having heard a couple engaged in marital relations through thin walls, and this was presented as simple evidence that the marriage was valid and consummated, not as something scandalous or inappropriate to have overheard. But let us go even further back to the early Middle Ages, say the 8th or 9th century. Here the situation was even more communal. Even wealthy lords and ladies did not have private bedrooms. The great hall of a castle or manor house served as the main living space during the day and the main sleeping space at night. When evening came, the lord and lady might retire to a slightly elevated platform at one end of the hall, where a large bed was set up. But they were not alone. Oh no. Sleeping around them on benches, on the floor, on whatever surfaces were available were their children, their servants, their knights, their attendants, any guests who happened to be staying with them, and even the hunting dogs. The hall would be filled with the sounds of snoring, coughing, shifting bodies, whisper conversations, and the occasional bark or whimper from the animals. This went on for centuries. It was only around the 13th or 14th century that the concept of the sola began to emerge. The sola was a private room, usually on an upper floor, where the lord and lady could retreat with perhaps 1 or 2 personal servants. But even then, true privacy was rare. Servants were expected to sleep in the room or just outside the door, ready to be called upon at any moment. For queens and noble ladies, the situation was particularly complex. Queen Elizabeth I of England, for example, had a magnificent bed, one of the most expensive pieces of furniture in the entire kingdom. But she did not sleep alone in that bed. Her ladies-in-waiting slept in the same chamber, though not usually in the bed itself. They slept on straw pallets on the floor, surrounding the Queen's bed like a protective barrier. Their job was to be available if the Queen needed anything during the night, but also to serve as witnesses, to ensure that no one could accuse the Queen of improper behaviour. Actually, let me tell you about an even more fascinating detail. In some wealthy medieval households, the bed itself was not even kept in what we would call a bedroom. It was kept in the main hall, the room where the family received guests, conducted business and socialised. Why? Because the bed was a status symbol. A truly magnificent bed, with its carved wooden posts, its embroidered curtains, its layers of expensive mattresses and coverlets, was one of the most valuable possessions a family could own. It was mentioned in wills passed down through generations, and sometimes even given as a royal gift. So wealthy families would position their beds prominently in the hall, where visitors could see and admire them. During the day, people might actually sit on the bed, fully clothed, to chat with friends. Medieval manuscripts show images of fully dressed people sitting up in bed, having conversations, conducting business, receiving visitors. The bed was a piece of furniture, yes, but it was also a stage, a throne, a symbol of wealth and power. Now, let's talk about the rules of shared sleeping, because yes, there were rules. Even though medieval people did not value privacy the way we do, they did have strong feelings about proper behaviour in a shared bed. First, you were expected to lie still. Fidgeting, tossing and turning, thrashing about in your sleep, these were considered extremely rude. Imagine trying to sleep when you are pressed up against 6 other people. If one person starts moving around, everyone feels it. Medieval advice manuals specifically instructed people to minimize their movements during the night. Second, you were not supposed to touch the other people in the bed unless necessary for warmth. Even though you were lying inches apart, you were expected to maintain a kind of respectful distance. Your bodies might touch because of the crowding, but you were not supposed to deliberately sprawl over someone else or use them as a pillow. Third, getting up during the night, which people frequently did during the watch between first and second sleep, required a careful navigation. You had to climb over potentially several sleeping bodies to reach the chamber pot or tend to the fire. This had to be done quietly and carefully so as not to wake everyone else. For unmarried women especially, the sleeping arrangements had a protective element. Remember how Margaret's daughters slept against the wall, with their mother between them and their father? This was not just about warmth, it was about honour, about ensuring that young unmarried women were always protected, always supervised even in sleep. A young woman's reputation was everything, and even the suggestion of impropriety could ruin her chances of a good marriage. But here is something that might make you laugh, or maybe cringe a bit. The same rules did not always apply to servants. Servant girls often slept wherever there was space, on benches in the kitchen, on the floor near the hearth, sometimes even in the stables with the animals. In larger households, male and female servants might sleep in the same room, though usually on opposite sides. The nobility worried a great deal about their own daughter's virtue, but the sleeping arrangements of servants were often far less supervised. There are records of pregnancies among servant girls, and when questioned, Some admitted that the father was a fellow servant who slept in the same room. The household might express disapproval, but it was seen as almost inevitable, a natural consequence of putting young men and women in close quarters night after night. Now, let me share something with you that really drives home how different medieval attitudes were. There is a recorded case from 15th century Belgium where a man was actually fined for hiding behind a staircase to spy on his own wife while she was giving birth. The fine was not for invading her privacy in general, but specifically because he was eavesdropping on childbirth, which was considered women's business. Men were not supposed to be anywhere near the birthing chamber. The fact that he was her husband did not matter. The fine was 15 livres, a substantial amount of money, and the court record specifically states that such eavesdropping does not befit a man. Think about that for a moment. A husband could sleep in the same bed as his wife, his children, and potentially a guest or two, and no one would bat an eye. But if he tried to be present during childbirth, he was breaking a sacred rule and would be punished for it. Privacy was not about being alone. It was about respecting the boundaries of certain sacred, gender-specific spaces and moments. As the centuries went on, attitudes slowly began to shift. By the 16th and 17th centuries, wealthier families started to value separate sleeping spaces more highly. The idea of the nuclear family sleeping together in one bed began to seem old-fashioned. Children were moved to separate beds, then separate rooms. Servants were housed in attic quarters. Guests were given their own chambers. But for the vast majority of medieval women, for someone like Margaret or Alice, their bed was never a private space. It was a shared space, a communal space, a space where family bonds were literally reinforced every single night as bodies pressed together for warmth and safety. And you know what? There might have been something beautiful about that, something we have lost. Yes, we value our privacy today, and I'm not suggesting we should go back to sleeping 7 to a bed. But those medieval women lying there in the darkness with their children on one side and their husband on the other, they had something we often lack. The physical reassurance of presence, the comfort of knowing they were not alone, the warmth of human connection that went beyond words. But the bed itself, the actual physical object they were lying on, that is a whole other story. And it is a story that reveals just how stark the divide was between rich and poor, between comfort and suffering in the medieval world. Because what you slept on could mean the difference between waking up rested and warm, or waking up cold, sore and covered in flea bites. The bed beneath you was not just furniture. It was a declaration of your worth, your status, your very place in the world, and we are going to explore that next. There is something we need to talk about, something that might make you look at your own bed with completely new eyes. Right now, wherever you are listening to this, you are probably lying on a mattress. Maybe it is memory foam, maybe it is a pillow top, maybe it is one of those fancy adjustable ones. You probably have sheets, soft and clean, maybe cotton or even silk. You have pillows, plural, probably at least 2. You have blankets or a comforter. And all of this, every single piece of it, you take for granted. You assume this is just what a bed is. But what if I told you that in medieval times your bed was the most expensive thing you owned? More expensive than your clothes, more expensive than your dishes, more expensive than almost anything else in your entire house. What if I told you that some beds were so valuable they were mentioned specifically in wills, passed down from parent to child like a precious inheritance? And what if I told you that for many medieval women, the word bed meant nothing more than a pile of straw on a cold stone floor? Let me take you into 3 different bedrooms on the same night in the year 1400. 3 women, 3 beds, 3 completely different realities. First, meet Eleanor. She is a peasant woman, a farmhand, working on a manor estate in the English countryside. Eleanor is 26 years old, unmarried, and she lives in a tiny cottage that belongs to the lord of the manor. Actually, cottage is probably too generous a word. It is more like a hut, one room with the walls made of mud and straw, a dirt floor, and a roof made of bundled reeds and thatch. When night falls, Eleanor does not have a bed to go to. She has a bench. A wooden bench built into the wall, about 6 feet long and maybe 2 feet wide. On this bench she places a thin sack stuffed with straw. That is her mattress. Over her body she pulls a rough woolen blanket, scratchy and threadbare, with holes that let the cold air through. Under her head, if she is lucky, she has a small pillow, also stuffed with straw, or maybe dried moss. This is it. This is her bed. And actually, Eleanor is not doing that badly because at least she has a bench to sleep on. Some farmhands, especially the young men who worked in the fields, slept directly on the dirt floor, with nothing but a blanket between their bodies and the cold, hard earth. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine lying down on bare ground, feeling every stone and lump beneath you, feeling the cold seeping up through the thin blanket into your bones? Can you imagine doing that every single night for your entire life? But here is what really gets me. Eleanor does not complain about this. She does not think of herself as deprived or suffering. This is simply her reality, the reality of her class, her status. She has never known anything different. Her mother slept on a bench. Her grandmother slept on a bench. This is what peasant women do. What does trouble Eleanor is the cold. Oh, the cold. In winter, the temperature inside her cottage is barely warmer than the temperature outside. The small fire in the centre of the room provides some heat, but it dies down during the night, and by morning there is often frost on the inside of the walls. Eleanor goes to sleep wearing every piece of clothing she owns, her undergown, her overgown, her woolen hose, her cap, everything layered on her body in a desperate attempt to stay warm, and the straw in her mattress. It is home to all sorts of creatures. Fleas, absolutely. Lice, probably. Mice, occasionally. Eleanor wakes up most mornings with small red bites on her arms and legs, itching like mad. She has learned to accept this too. Everyone has fleas, everyone has lice, rich and poor alike, though the rich have more resources to fight them. Now, let us leave Eleanor shivering on her bench and travel a few miles down the road to the home of a merchant family. Here we meet Joan, the wife of a successful cloth merchant. Joan is 38 years old, mother of 5 living children, and she sleeps in an actual bed, a real, proper bed that her husband purchased when they married 20 years ago. The bed frame is made of oak, solid and sturdy, with a simple headboard carved with their family initials. The mattress, and this is where it gets interesting, is actually 3 mattresses stacked on top of each other. The bottom one is stuffed with straw, providing the base layer and some structure. The middle one is stuffed with wool, adding softness and warmth. And the top one, the one Joan actually lies on, is stuffed with a mixture of wool and a small amount of goose feathers. Now, those feathers were expensive. Joan's husband had to save for months to afford them. Geese were valuable for their eggs and their meat, and plucking them for feathers was done carefully, only a few times a year. The feathers had to be cleaned, dried, and sorted. The softest down from the breast of the bird was the most prized, but even the regular feathers were considered a luxury. On top of these mattresses, Joan has sheets, linen sheets, which were woven by hand and took weeks of labour to produce. She has 2 wool blankets, and in the coldest part of winter, she has a coverlet, a thick quilted blanket filled with more wool and sewn with a pattern of flowers and vines. Her husband gave her this coverlet as a wedding gift, and she has treasured it for 2 decades, mending it carefully whenever it tears, washing it only once or twice a year because the process is so laborious. And here is something that really shows you the value of this bed. it is mentioned in Joan's will. Yes, she has written a will, even though she is still relatively young and healthy, because childbirth is dangerous and life is uncertain. In that will, she specifies that the bed, with all its mattresses and blankets and the embroidered coverlet, should go to her eldest daughter when Joan dies, not to her husband because he can get another bed, to her daughter because this bed represents security, comfort, a foundation for her future married life. Joan's bed also has curtains, heavy wool curtains that hang from a wooden frame attached to the ceiling. These curtains can be drawn closed at night, creating a small enclosed space around the bed. This serves multiple purposes. First, it provides warmth. The curtains trap the heat from the bodies in the bed, creating a cozy microclimate even when the rest of the room is freezing. Second, it provides a tiny bit of privacy, or at least the illusion of privacy, in a household where multiple children and possibly servants are sleeping in the same room. And third, it provides protection from drafts, from insects, from the general discomforts of medieval life. When Joan climbs into her bed at night, drawing those curtains around her, she feels safe. She feels blessed. She knows that her bed is a sign of her family's success, their rise from poverty to respectability, and she knows that many women in her town would envy her this bed. But now, let us travel one more time to the castle of a nobleman, where we meet Lady Catherine, a woman of the aristocracy. Catherine is 42 years old, the wife of a baron, and her bed is not just a piece of furniture. It is a work of art, a statement of power, a symbol of her family's place in the world. The bed frame is massive, made of carved oak with 4 posts that rise nearly 8 feet from the floor. The posts are carved with intricate designs, vines, animals, family crests, biblical scenes. The headboard is even more elaborate, inlaid with precious woods and depicting the baron's coat of arms in stunning detail. This bed took a master carpenter 6 months to build, and it cost more than most peasants would earn in 10 years of labour. The mattresses, and there are 4 of them, are stuffed with the finest materials. The base is straw, yes, but above that is a thick layer of wool from specially bred sheep. Above that is a mattress of pure goose down, soft as a cloud, and on top of everything is a feather bed, a kind of quilted cover filled with the softest, most expensive feathers available, creating a surface so plush that Lady Catherine feels like she is floating when she lies down. The sheets are linen, but not just any linen. This linen has been woven so fine and soft that it feels almost like silk. It has been bleached white, a process that requires laying the fabric in the sun for weeks and treating it with special solutions. White linens are a status symbol because they show dirt easily, which means they must be washed frequently, which means you must have servants to do the washing. Only the wealthy can afford truly white sheets. The blankets are wool, but they are lined with fur. Fox fur, rabbit fur, sometimes even ermine if the family is wealthy enough. In the very depths of winter, Lady Catherine also has a coverlet made of silk, imported from the East at enormous expense, embroidered with gold thread in patterns of roses and lilies. This coverlet alone is worth more than Eleanor the farmhand will earn in her entire lifetime. And the bed curtains, they are not simple wool like Joan's. They are velvet, dyed a deep crimson red, a colour that requires expensive dye made from insects imported from distant lands. The curtains are embroidered with the family motto in gold and silver thread. They are lined with wool for warmth and weighted at the bottom so they hang perfectly. When not in use, the curtains are tied back with silk cords and tassels, bundled up to look like elegant bags hanging from the corners of the bed. This bed is so impressive, so beautiful, that Lady Catherine does not keep it in a private bedroom. Oh no, that would be a waste. The bed stands in the great hall, in a prominent position where visitors can see and admire it. During the day, fully dressed guests sometimes sit on the bed to converse with Lady Catherine, because the bed is not just a sleeping place. It is a throne, a reception area, a symbol of her status. When important guests visit, when the bishop comes to call or a royal messenger arrives with news, they are sometimes invited to sit on Lady Catherine's bed as a mark of special honour. The bed is where she receives visitors when she is ill, where she rests during the afternoon, where she conducts the business of the household. And here is something that might surprise you. This bed will be mentioned in not one but multiple legal documents. It appears in Lady Catherine's marriage contract specified as part of her dowry. It appears in her husband's will, left to their eldest son as part of the inheritance. It appears in household inventories taken for tax purposes. This bed is not just furniture. It is property, wealth, legacy. But whether you are Eleanor on her straw-filled bench, Joan with her 3 mattresses and wool curtains, or Lady Catherine in her silk-draped palace of comfort, there is one thing all 3 women share: the battle against the creatures in their beds. Because no matter how expensive your mattress, no matter how fine your sheets, medieval beds were infested. Fleas were the most common problem. They lived in the straw, in the wool, even in the feather mattresses of the wealthy. They bit and itched and multiplied endlessly. Lice were nearly as common, especially in the winter when everyone wore multiple layers of clothing and bathed infrequently. The wealthy fought back with various strategies. They used tightly woven mattress covers called ticking, which were supposed to keep the bugs contained inside the mattress rather than crawling out onto the sleeper. They stuffed their mattresses with herbs known to repel insects: lavender, rosemary, wormwood, pennyroyal. They stored their linens in cedar chests, because cedar wood was believed to repel moths and other pests. Some wealthy households changed the straw in their mattresses once or twice a year, a major undertaking that required carrying the old straw out to be burned and bringing in fresh straw from the fields. But even this did not eliminate the problem. Within weeks, the fleas would return, carried in on the bodies of servants, on the fur of hunting dogs, on the very clothes people wore. For peasants like Eleanor, there was no real defence. You shared your bed with insects, and that was that. You scratched the bites. You picked the lice from your hair and crushed them between your fingernails. You learned to sleep through the itching. What else could you do? And here is something that brings tears to my eyes when I really think about it. Eleanor, lying on her hard bench with her thin blanket and her flea-infested straw, probably looked at Joan's bed with envy. And Joan, sleeping on her 3 mattresses with her wool blankets, probably looked at Lady Catherine's silk-draped marvel with longing. But Lady Catherine, for all her luxury, for all her comfort, she had her own troubles. Her bed might be beautiful, but it was also a burden. It had to be maintained, protected, insured. It represented not just comfort, but obligation, status, the weight of aristocratic expectation. Sometimes I wonder if any of them, on a warm summer night when the fleas were not too bad and the moon was shining through the window, simply felt grateful to have a place to lay their heads, a place to rest, a place to dream. But speaking of what they wore while lying in those beds, that is our next journey. Because the question of nightwear in medieval times is far stranger and more fascinating than you might imagine. Did they sleep naked? Did they have pyjamas? And what about those braids? Why did nearly every medieval woman sleep with her hair carefully braided and tied up? The answers might shock you, or make you laugh, or both. Let us find out together. So here is a question that probably never crossed your mind until this very moment. What are you wearing right now as you listen to this? Pyjamas, a t-shirt and shorts, maybe one of those comfortable nightgowns, or perhaps, if you are being honest, just your underwear or nothing at all. Whatever it is, you probably did not think twice about it. You just put on whatever felt comfortable and climbed into bed. But imagine if someone 1,000 years from now discovered images of you sleeping, Imagine if they found drawings in old books showing people in beds, and they had to guess, based only on those pictures, what people in the 21st century wore to sleep. Would they get it right? Would they understand the difference between summer sleepwear and winter sleepwear? Would they know that some people change their nighttime clothing based on who else is in the house? This is exactly the puzzle historians face when trying to understand what medieval women wore to bed. And the answer, it turns out, is far more complicated and surprising than you might think. Let us start with the evidence we have. Throughout medieval manuscripts, there are hundreds of illustrations showing people in bed. And when you look at these images carefully, something becomes immediately clear. Most of them show people sleeping completely naked, not partially clothed, not wearing some kind of undergarment, naked. Skin on display, bodies uncovered except for the blankets pulled up to various heights. Now, before you get too shocked, we need to remember something important. Medieval artists were not drawing from photographs. They were not trying to create documentary evidence of exactly what people wore. They were often working from conventions, from artistic traditions, from symbolic representations. A naked body in bed might have meant something different to a medieval viewer than it means to us. But here is the thing, we also have written evidence, descriptions from medieval sources, that confirm at least some people, maybe even most people in the early Middle Ages, did sleep without any clothing. Let me take you to Scandinavia in the 9th century. We have records from this period, including chronicles written by a monk named Thietmar of Merseburg, who describes the sleeping habits of people in his region. He specifically mentions that people commonly slept naked or dressed only in their linen undergarments. The linen undergarment he is referring to would have been a simple long shirt, like a chemise for women or a shirt for men, made of undyed linen and worn next to the skin during the day under their outer clothes. Why would people sleep naked? Well, think about it practically. If you are a medieval woman and you only own 2 or 3 garments total, you cannot afford to wear them out by sleeping in them. Fabric is expensive. A good wool dress might take weeks to weave and sew. If you wear it to bed every night, rolling around in it, sweating in it, it will wear out much faster. Better to take it off, fold it carefully, and sleep either naked or in your thin linen undergown, which is much easier and cheaper to replace. Also, and this is important, medieval people did not wash their outer clothes very often. Wool garments were not really washable in the way we think of washing clothes today. Getting wool wet could shrink it, ruin it, felt it into a useless mass. So you might wear the same wool dress for months, even years, spot cleaning it when necessary but never fully washing it. Would you want to sleep in that? In a garment that has absorbed months of sweat and dirt and cooking smoke? Probably not. So for many medieval women, the routine was this. As evening approached and the household prepared for bed, you would remove your outer gown, carefully hanging it on a peg or folding it on a chest. You would remove your belt, your apron, any jewellery or accessories. If it was summer and warm, you might remove your linen undergown as well and sleep naked. If it was winter, or if you felt modest or if there were guests in the house, you might keep the undergown on. But here is where it gets really interesting. We know that by the late Middle Ages, probably around the 15th or 16th century, specific garments designed for sleeping began to appear. These were called night shirts for men and nightgowns for women, though they were not quite like what we think of today. A medieval nightgown was essentially a longer, looser version of the linen undergown, made specifically to be worn at night. It would be cut generously to allow for movement and comfort, made from soft linen that had been washed many times to make it even softer. Wealthier women might have nightgowns with a bit of embroidery at the neckline or cuffs, a small luxury that no one else would see, but that made the wearer feel special. Now, monks had a different approach entirely. Monks, who slept alone in cells or dormitories, often slept in their robes. Yes, the same robes they wore during the day. Why? Warmth mainly. A monk's cell was usually tiny, cold and drafty. The stone walls provided no insulation. There was no fire because fires were expensive and dangerous. So a monk would lie down on his simple straw mattress, pull his woolen robe tightly around his body, maybe add a blanket if he was lucky, and try to sleep through the bitter cold. The monastic rule of Saint Benedict actually addresses this. Benedict, writing in the 6th century, specified that monks should sleep clothed, ready to rise quickly for midnight prayers. They were supposed to sleep in their habits, with their belts loosened for comfort but still basically dressed. This was partly about practicality and partly about modesty. Nakedness was associated with vulnerability, with sin, with the fall of Adam and Eve. Sleeping clothed was a way of maintaining discipline, of rejecting the weakness of the flesh. But ordinary women, married women especially, did not usually follow monastic rules. They had different concerns, different priorities, which brings us to hair. Oh, the hair. Because here is something that shows up again and again in medieval sources. Women almost always slept with their hair covered and braided. Always. And there were very specific reasons for this. First, warmth. You lose a tremendous amount of body heat through your head. In a cold medieval bedroom with no central heating and maybe just the dying embers of a fire providing any warmth at all, covering your head was essential. So medieval women, rich and poor alike, wore some kind of head covering to bed. For peasant women, this might be a simple linen cap tied under the chin. For wealthier women, it might be a more elaborate nightcap, possibly embroidered, possibly with a bit of lace. Second, hair care. Medieval women who could afford it had long hair, really long hair, sometimes down to their waists or even longer. This hair was a source of pride, a symbol of femininity and beauty. But it was also a practical nightmare. If you've ever had long hair, you know that it tangles. Imagine sleeping with long, loose hair in a medieval bed, tossing and turning on a rough wool blanket or a straw-stuffed pillow. By morning, your hair would be a rat's nest, almost impossible to comb out. So the solution was braiding. Before bed, a woman would carefully plait her hair into one long braid or sometimes 2 braids. This kept the hair contained, prevented tangling, and made morning grooming much easier. The braid would then be tucked up inside the nightcap or wrapped around the head, completely out of the way. But there was also a third reason, and this one is more subtle but equally important: modesty and propriety. In medieval Christian culture, a woman's loose, flowing hair was considered seductive, even dangerous. It was associated with sexuality, with temptation. Respectable married women were expected to keep their hair covered in public at all times. The only person who should see a woman's hair loose and uncovered was her husband, and even then only in the privacy of the bedchamber. So braiding and covering your hair at night was a way of maintaining that boundary, that sense of propriety, even in sleep. It was a statement that you were a respectable woman, a modest woman, even in the intimate privacy of your bed. Now, let us talk about something that might make you squirm a bit: sleeping etiquette when you are not alone in the bed. Remember, most medieval women slept with other people in the bed, whether family members or guests, and there were definite rules about how to behave. One medieval courtesy book, a guide to proper behaviour written for young people, specifically addresses sleeping manners. It advises that when sleeping with others, you should lie quietly on your side, not sprawling on your back taking up space. You should keep your hands and feet to yourself. You should not fidget or toss about, and you should absolutely not remove more clothing than necessary, especially if sharing a bed with someone other than your spouse. This last point is fascinating because it reveals the tension between comfort and modesty. In summer, when it was hot, you might desperately want to remove your nightgown and sleep naked to stay cool. but if you were sharing a bed with your children or with a guest, this would be considered highly inappropriate. So you would lie there, sweating in your linen gown, sacrificing comfort for propriety. There are also references to what people wore during that wakeful period between first and second sleep. Some sources suggest that people would sit up in bed during the watch, but they would pull the blankets around their shoulders like a shawl to stay warm. Others mention people getting out of bed to tend the fire or use the chamber pot, and in these cases, they would sometimes throw a cloak or shawl over their nightclothes before walking across the cold floor. Wealthier women might have a special robe or dressing gown kept near the bed specifically for this purpose. It would be warmer and heavier than the nightgown, designed to be put on quickly in the dark. Some of these dressing gowns were quite beautiful, made of wool or even velvet, lined with fur for extra warmth. And here is a detail that absolutely delights me. We have records of some very wealthy women who had special sleeping gloves. Yes, gloves worn to bed. These were not regular gloves, but soft, thin gloves made of linen or even silk, designed to keep the hands warm and also to protect the skin. Some recipes from medieval beauty manuals suggest wearing gloves to bed after treating your hands with various ointments and creams to help the treatments absorb overnight. Can you imagine a noble lady lying in her silk-draped bed, wearing her embroidered nightgown, her hair braided and tucked into an elaborate nightcap, and her hands covered in scented cream and sleeping gloves? She would have looked like she was dressed for some kind of elegant nighttime ceremony, not just going to sleep. But for every woman like that, there were 100 women like Marjorie, a serving girl who slept in the kitchen on a bench near the hearth, wearing whatever undergown she'd worn all day, with no nightcap because she could not afford one, her hair in a simple braid that she did herself in 30 seconds before collapsing onto her bench in exhaustion. The contrast is stark, is it not? And it reminds us that in the medieval world, even something as basic as nightclothes was a marker of status, of wealth, of your place in society. There is one more thing I want to mention before we move on, and it is about children. What did children wear to bed? For babies, and very young children, the answer is swaddling. Infants were wrapped tightly in long strips of linen, their arms bound to their sides, their legs held straight. This was believed to ensure that their limbs would grow straight and strong. Babies slept swaddled, day and night, for the first several months of life. Older children, once they were past the swaddling stage, usually slept in simple linen shifts, the same undergarments they wore during the day. Poor children might sleep in their only set of clothes, never removing them at all. In winter, they might sleep in multiple layers, every piece of clothing they owned piled on their bodies to fight the cold. And here is something that breaks my heart. Some very poor children had no clothes at all specifically for sleeping. They would sleep in whatever they had been wearing during the day, and if those clothes were being washed or mended, they would sleep naked under a shared blanket with their siblings, their bodies pressed together for warmth. So you see, the question of what medieval women wore to bed is not a simple one. It depended on the season, on your wealth, on who else was in the bed, on your personal preferences, on your age and social status. Some women slept naked, some in linen undergowns, some in nightgowns, some in their day clothes. Some covered their heads, some did not. Some braided their hair, some left it loose. But whatever they wore or did not wear, they all faced the same fundamental challenge: staying warm enough to sleep through the long, dark, cold medieval night. Which brings us to something we have not yet fully explored. What happened when a medieval woman was pregnant? Because pregnancy changed everything about sleep, made it more difficult, more dangerous, more fraught with fear and superstition. And the way pregnant women navigated the nighttime world reveals some of the most intimate, most human aspects of medieval life. Let us step into that world now gently and with reverence, because what we are about to discover is both heartbreaking and beautiful. I need to tell you about a woman named Beatrice. She lived in Florence in the year 1423, and she was 24 years old and 7 months pregnant with her third child. 2 nights ago, Beatrice sat at her writing desk and wrote her will, not because she was ill, not because she had some premonition of disaster, but because this is what pregnant women did in medieval times. They wrote their wills before giving birth, because there was a very real chance, a terrifyingly high chance, that they would not survive. Let me give you the numbers, the cold, hard statistics that kept women like Beatrice awake at night. In Florence during the 1420s, approximately 1 in every 5 married women died because of childbirth. 1 in 5. Think about that. If you gathered 5 pregnant women in a room, statistically, 1 of them would not live to see her child's first birthday. And these were not just poor women, not just peasants with no access to medical care. This statistic applied across all social classes. Rich or poor, young or old, first baby or 5th baby, pregnancy was Russian roulette with your life. So Beatrice lies in her bed tonight, feeling her baby moving inside her, and she cannot sleep. Not because she's uncomfortable, though she is, not because the baby is kicking her ribs, though it is, but because she is terrified. And every other pregnant woman in the medieval world understood exactly what she was feeling. How do you sleep when you know that the act of bringing life into the world might kill you? How do you close your eyes at night when you have spent the day making arrangements for your own death? How do you rest when every kick from the baby reminds you that the clock is ticking toward a moment of profound danger? Let me take you through a night in the life of a pregnant medieval woman, because the experience of sleeping while pregnant was unlike anything else, shaped by fear and faith and a desperate hope that somehow, you would be one of the lucky ones. First, there was the physical discomfort. Pregnant women today complain about not being able to find a comfortable sleeping position, and they have soft mattresses, multiple pillows, adjustable beds. Now imagine trying to sleep heavily pregnant on a mattress stuffed with straw with maybe 1 pillow, with your body swelling and aching and needing to urinate every hour. Medieval medical texts, written by men of course, offered advice on how pregnant women should sleep. The most common recommendation was to sleep on the left side. Why? Because medieval physicians, following the teachings of ancient Greek and Roman doctors, believed that the womb was divided into chambers, and the left side was associated with female babies while the right side was associated with male babies. Sleeping on your left side was supposed to encourage the proper positioning of the baby and promote easier labour. Now, we know today that sleeping position during pregnancy matters, but for different reasons related to blood flow and pressure on major blood vessels. The medieval reasoning was wrong, but interestingly, their conclusion was somewhat right. Left-side sleeping is indeed often recommended today for pregnant women in the later stages of pregnancy. But beyond position, there was the question of what to do about all the other discomforts. Swollen feet and ankles, back pain, heartburn, shortness of breath. Medieval women had their own remedies for these ailments, passed down from mother to daughter, shared among women in whispered conversations. For swollen feet, some women would soak them in cool water before bed, sometimes with herbs added for relief. For back pain, a warmed cloth, heated by the fire and applied to the lower back, provided some comfort. For heartburn, small sips of watered-down wine or herbal tea were recommended. None of these cures were particularly effective, but they were something, some small action you could take to feel like you had a bit of control. And then there was the dietary advice. Oh, the dietary advice. Medieval pregnancy regimens, those texts written by physicians for wealthy patients, were very specific about what pregnant women should eat and when. Bernard de Gordon, a 14th century physician, wrote extensively about pregnancy diet in his medical encyclopedia. He recommended that pregnant women eat foods that were roasted, fried and fragrant. He believed these foods would strengthen the baby and make labour easier. But here is the irony. Most pregnant women could not afford to follow this advice. Roasted meats, fried foods, fragrant spices, these were luxuries. Most pregnant peasant women ate the same bread, pottage, and occasional bit of cheese that they had always eaten, pregnant or not. Their bodies were nourished or undernourished based on the harvest, the season, the luck of their family's circumstances. And this brings us to something darker, something that haunts me when I think about medieval pregnancy. Poor nutrition combined with frequent pregnancies meant that many women's bodies were simply worn out. Imagine being pregnant 6, 7, 8 times in your life, each pregnancy draining your body of nutrients, each birth taking a toll on your physical health, each child you nurse depleting your reserves even further, and all of this while doing hard physical labour, working in the fields, carrying water, cooking over a hot fire, scrubbing clothes in cold streams. Is it any wonder that so many women died in childbirth? Their bodies had nothing left to give. But let us return to Beatrice lying in her bed in Florence, her hand resting on her swollen belly. She is not a peasant. Her husband is a successful wool merchant, and they live in a comfortable house in the city. She has access to better food, better shelter, better medical care than most women of her time. And still, she is afraid, because Beatrice knows the stories. Everyone knows the stories. The woman down the street who laboured for 3 days and finally died, the baby dying with her. The cousin who survived the birth but developed a fever a week later and was dead within days. The neighbour who had a relatively easy delivery but then started bleeding and bled to death before anyone could help her. These stories were not abstract. They were not rare occurrences that you heard about from distant places. They were immediate, personal, happening to women you knew, women you had talked to just weeks before, women who had seemed healthy and strong and were now in their graves. So what did women like Beatrice do to try to protect themselves? They turned to religion, to superstition, to whatever tools they had to bargain with fate. The most common practice was prayer. Pregnant women prayed to the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus, who had experienced pregnancy and childbirth herself and was therefore seen as a special protector of women in labour. They prayed to St. Anne, Mary's mother, and the patron saint of mothers and pregnant women. They prayed to St. Margaret of Antioch, who according to legend had been swallowed by a dragon and emerged unharmed, making her the patron saint of women in difficult labour. These prayers were not just offered in church on Sundays. They were woven into the fabric of daily life, especially at night. Before going to sleep, a pregnant woman might say a special prayer asking for protection through the night and through the coming labour. Upon waking in the middle of the night during the watch, she might offer another prayer, a quiet conversation with the saints who she hoped were listening. But prayer was not the only tool. There were also physical objects believed to have protective power. The most important of these was the birthing girdle, a long strip of parchment or fabric inscribed with prayers, biblical verses, and sometimes images of saints. These girdles were often owned by monasteries or churches and could be borrowed by pregnant women as their due date approached. A woman would wear the birthing girdle around her belly, or tie it around her waist, or place it under her pillow at night. The belief was that the holy words and images would protect both mother and baby from harm. Some birthing girdles were incredibly elaborate, covered in detailed illustrations and written in Latin by skilled scribes. Others were simpler, handwritten prayers on plain parchment. And here is something fascinating. These girdles were highly sought after. There are records of women travelling many miles to borrow a birthing girdle known to be particularly powerful, one that had been used by many women who survived their labours. The girdles were passed from woman to woman, from generation to generation, accumulating stories and a reputation for effectiveness. Beatrice has borrowed such a girdle from her local monastery, It lies now beside her bed, carefully wrapped in clean linen, waiting for the moment when labour begins. Just knowing it is there provides some comfort, some sense that she has done everything possible to protect herself and her baby. But the nights are still hard. Beatrice finds that she cannot sleep for more than an hour or two at a time. The baby presses on her bladder, forcing her to get up repeatedly to use the chamber pot. Each time she moves, her back aches, her hips hurt, her swollen feet throb. She lies back down, tries to find a comfortable position, and just as she is drifting off, she feels another sharp kick, or a wave of heartburn, or suddenly she cannot catch her breath because the baby is pressing on her lungs. And always, underneath all the physical discomfort, there is the fear that keeps her mind racing, even when her body is exhausted. She thinks about her 2 living children sleeping in the next room. If she dies, who will care for them? Her husband would remarry, certainly, but would the new wife love her children? Would they remember their real mother? She thinks about the possibility of dying in childbirth and what that death might be like. Would it be quick, a sudden hemorrhage that takes her before she even knows what is happening? Or would it be slow, days of fever and pain, conscious the whole time of her life slipping away? Medieval medical knowledge about pregnancy complications was limited and often wrong, but medieval women were not stupid. They knew, from watching other women die, that there were different ways childbirth could go wrong. They knew about breech births, about babies stuck in the birth canal, about bleeding that would not stop. They did not have the medical terminology for these problems, but they understood the reality of them. Some women tried to make peace with the possibility of death. They confessed their sins to a priest, ensuring they would die in a state of grace. They said goodbye to their children, though not explicitly, not wanting to frighten them. They told their husbands where important documents were kept, what debts were owed, which family members should be contacted if the worst happened. And then, having done all they could do, they tried to sleep. They tried to rest their bodies for the ordeal ahead. They tried to push the fear down to focus on the hope that maybe, just maybe, they would be one of the ones who survived. There is an account from a 15th century English woman named Marjorie Kemper, who wrote a spiritual autobiography that includes descriptions of her pregnancies and childbirths. Marjorie had 14 children over the course of her life, which means she went through this terror 14 times. After her first birth, which was extremely difficult, she experienced what we would now call postpartum psychosis. She became convinced that demons were attacking her, that she was damned, that evil forces surrounded her. Her behaviour became so erratic that her family actually chained her up in a storeroom for 6 months to keep her from hurting herself or others. Now, we can look at this through a modern lens and understand it as severe postpartum mental illness, likely exacerbated by the trauma of a difficult birth and the very real fear she had experienced during pregnancy. But to Marjorie and her family, this was demonic attack, spiritual crisis, a direct assault by evil forces. And here is what strikes me. After recovering from this episode, Marjorie went on to have 13 more children, 13 more pregnancies, 30 more times facing the possibility of death, 30 more times experiencing whatever physical and mental trauma accompanied each birth. Why would she do this? Because she had no real choice. Birth control, as we understand it, did not exist. A married woman was expected to have children, as many as God sent her. To refuse your husband's bed was grounds for severe social censure or even annulment. So women endured. They endured the fear, the pain, the exhaustion, the danger. They endured pregnancy after pregnancy, birth after birth, knowing that each one might be the one that killed them. And at night, lying in their beds, they whispered prayers into the darkness. They made bargains with God and the saints. They promised to be better, to do more, to give more, if only they could survive, if only their babies could survive. Beatrice, our wool merchant's wife in Florence, will survive her third childbirth. I wish I could tell you that all medieval women were so lucky, but of course they were not. The numbers do not lie. 1 in 5 did not make it, and even those who survived often faced devastating losses. Infant mortality was catastrophically high. Many women watched multiple children die in infancy or early childhood, their hearts breaking again and again. But tonight, right now, Beatrice does not know what will happen. She only knows she is tired and afraid and trying desperately to sleep so her body will be strong enough for whatever comes next. As she finally drifts off sometime after midnight, her hand still resting protectively on her belly, she is unaware that in another part of the city, another pregnant woman is experiencing something entirely different. Not just physical discomfort or fear of childbirth, but something more immediate, more terrifying. Something that many medieval women experienced but few talked about openly. That woman is experiencing what medieval people called the mare, the nightmare, an attack by an evil spirit that comes in the night and presses down on your chest, stealing your breath, paralyzing your body, filling you with terror. And pregnant women, already vulnerable, already fearful, were believed to be especially susceptible to these attacks. What was really happening to these women, and how did they try to protect themselves? We are about to find out. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night unable to move? Your eyes are open, you can see the room around you, but your body is completely frozen. You try to speak, to call out, but no sound comes. You feel a weight pressing down on your chest, making it hard to breathe. And somewhere in the darkness, you sense a presence, something malevolent, watching you, waiting. If you have experienced this, you are not alone. Modern science tells us that between 5 and 20% of people will experience this at least once in their lifetime. We call it sleep paralysis now, and we understand it as disruption in the sleep cycle, a moment when your mind wakes up but your body remains in the paralyzed state of REM sleep. But in medieval times, this experience had a different name. It was called the mare, and it was not a medical condition. It was an attack. An assault by an evil spirit that crept into your bedroom, climbed onto your body, and tried to crush the life out of you. Let me tell you about Hildegard, a woman living in a small German village in the year 1200. Hildegard is 30 years old, married to a blacksmith, mother of 3 children. She is, by all accounts, a normal woman living a normal life. But 3 nights ago, something happened to Hildegard that has left her terrified to go to sleep. She had gone to bed at her usual time shortly after sunset. She fell into her first sleep easily, exhausted from a long day of work. But then, sometime around midnight, she woke. Not naturally, not gently, but with a sudden jolt of pure terror. Her eyes opened, and she could see the dark shapes of her cottage around her, the dying embers of the fire casting faint orange light on the walls. She could hear her husband snoring softly beside her, could hear her children breathing in their sleep nearby. Everything was normal. Everything was as it should be, except she could not move. She tried to sit up, but her body would not respond. She tried to turn her head, but it remained frozen in place. She attempted to call out to her husband, to wake him, to ask for help, but when she opened her mouth, no sound emerged. It was as if her voice had been stolen, her body turned to stone, and then she felt it. A weight. Starting at her feet, slowly moving up her body, up her legs, over her hips, settling onto her stomach and chest. The weight was immense, crushing, making it difficult to draw breath. She gasped for air, her chest straining against the invisible pressure. But the worst part, the part that would haunt her for weeks afterward, was the presence. She could not see it clearly in the darkness, but she knew something was there, something sitting on her chest, pressing down, watching her struggle. She could feel its malevolence, its intention to harm her, maybe even to kill her. How long did this last? To Hildegard it felt like hours, though in reality it was probably only a minute or two. Finally, somehow, she managed to move her hand, just a twitch of her fingers, and with that tiny movement the spell broke. The weight lifted. The presence vanished. She sucked in a huge breath of air and sat bolt upright in bed, her heart hammering, her body covered in cold sweat. Her husband woke, startled by her sudden movement. "What is wrong?" he asked. And Hildegard, still shaking, told him, "The mare came for me." He understood immediately. Everyone in the village knew about the mare. Some called it the mare, or the mare, or the Ephialtes if they knew the old Greek term. But whatever name you used, the experience was the same. A nocturnal attack by an evil spirit that tried to suffocate its victims while they slept. Now, before we go further, I want you to think about this for a moment. Imagine living in a world where this experience, this terrifying sleep paralysis, is not understood as a medical phenomenon but as a demonic attack. Imagine being Hildegard, lying in your bed the next night, afraid to fall asleep because you think the mare might come back. What would you do? How would you protect yourself? Medieval people had answers to these questions. They had developed over centuries a whole system of beliefs and practices designed to ward off the mare and protect sleepers from its attacks. First, there was the question of what the mare actually was. Different people had different theories. Some believed it was a demon, a servant of the devil sent to torment the faithful. Others thought it was a witch, a living woman who had sold her soul to dark forces and could send her spirit out of her body at night to attack her enemies. There were stories, passed down through generations, of mares being sent by jealous rivals, by angry neighbours, by anyone who wished you harm. One particularly dramatic story comes from Norway. There was a king, so the tale goes, whose wife grew tired of waiting for him to return from a long journey. 10 years she waited, and finally, in her anger and frustration, she consulted a sorceress. The sorceress sent a mare to attack the king in his sleep. The spirit came in the night and began crushing the king's legs. His warriors, sleeping nearby, heard him cry out and rushed to help. They gathered around his head, trying to protect him from the invisible attacker. But when they defended his head, the mare shifted to his legs. When they defended his legs, it moved to his head. They could not protect him from all sides at once. The spirit pressed down on his head with such force that the king died, suffocated by an invisible enemy. Now, this story is probably legend, not history. But the fact that such stories existed, that they were told and retold, shows you how seriously people took the threat of the mare. This was not just a bad dream. This was a real danger that could kill you. So what defences did women like Hildegard have against the mare? The most common protection was iron. Iron was believed to repel evil spirits of all kinds, and the mare was no exception. Some women would place an iron horseshoe above their bed, or tuck a small iron knife under their pillow. The belief was that the mare, being the supernatural creature, could not bear the presence of cold iron and would flee from it. Hildegard, after her terrifying experience, convinced her husband to forge a small iron amulet for her, a simple cross that she now keeps under her pillow every night. Does it work? Well, she has not been attacked again. So in her mind, yes, absolutely it works. Herbs were another form of protection. Rosemary was particularly valued, believed to ward off evil influences when placed near the bed or tucked into your nightcap. Some women would burn dried rosemary in the evening, letting the smoke fill the sleeping area, creating a proactive barrier against supernatural threats. Lavender, sage and rue were also used for similar purposes, each herb carrying its own reputation for driving away malevolent spirits. Prayer, of course, was essential. there were specific prayers designed to protect sleepers from the mare. Some of these were official church prayers, while others were folk charms passed down from mother to daughter, mixing Christian elements with older pagan protective formulas. A woman might recite such a prayer 3 times before bed, making the sign of the cross over her chest and head, asking God and the saints to guard her through the night. But here is what fascinates me. Medieval physicians also tried to explain the mare, and their explanations were surprisingly close to what we understand today, even though their underlying theory was completely different. A 13th century physician named Arnold of Villanova wrote extensively about the mare, which he called the incubus in Latin, meaning the crusher. He described it as a condition where the patient knows they cannot speak or move freely, and they perceive the cause of this impediment. He explained that when a person is in a light sleep, their imagination and perception are not fully bound by sleep, so they observe, in their mind's eye, something that represents the cause of their inability to move. Since the chest and throat are prevented from expanding normally, they imagine the shape of someone lying upon them and strangling them. Think about that for a moment. Arnold understood that this was a phenomenon of the sleep state, a moment when the mind was partially awake while the body remained asleep. He understood that the victim's imagination was creating the visual experience of an attacker based on the physical sensation of being unable to breathe properly. This is remarkably close to our modern understanding of sleep paralysis and the hallucinations that often accompany it. But Arnold, like other medieval physicians, still had to explain why this happened. And here his theory goes off track from our modern understanding. He believed it was caused by bad vapours rising from the stomach during sleep, blocking the heart and brain, creating the sensation of suffocation. These vapours might be produced by eating the wrong foods before bed, particularly raw or fatty foods that created a kind of smoke inside the body. Other physicians blamed the sleeping position, saying that sleeping on your back made you more susceptible to mare attacks. Some connected it to an overabundance of phlegm in the body, one of the 4 humours that medieval medicine believed governed health. A few even linked it to epilepsy, seeing the mare as a minor form of that condition. The prescribed treatments reflected these theories. If bad vapours from food were the cause, then changing your diet was the solution. Avoid heavy meals before bed, eat more cooked foods and fewer raw ones, drink warming wine to aid digestion. If sleeping position was the problem, train yourself to sleep on your side. If humoral imbalance was to blame, seek bloodletting or herbal remedies to restore proper balance to your body. But here is the interesting thing. While physicians wrote these learned treatises trying to explain the mare in medical terms, most ordinary people, including women like Hildegard, continued to believe it was a spiritual attack. And who can blame them? If you have experienced sleep paralysis, especially the kind accompanied by vivid hallucinations, you know how intensely real it feels. You do not wake up thinking, "Oh, that was just my brain misfiring during a sleep transition." You wake up thinking, something was in my room, something attacked me. Medieval accounts from people who experienced mare attacks describe seeing specific shapes and figures. Some saw an old woman, hunched and malevolent, sitting on their chest. Some saw a dark, shadowy figure with glowing eyes. Some saw animals, particularly black cats or dogs. Some experienced not a visual hallucination but an auditory one, hearing whispers or laughter or breathing close to their ear. And pregnant women, as I mentioned earlier, were believed to be especially vulnerable to mare attacks. Why? Because pregnancy was seen as a time of special vulnerability, when a woman's body was open, literally and metaphorically, to outside influences. The boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds was thought to be thinner for pregnant women, making them easier targets for malevolent forces. There is a legend, going back to ancient times, about a demon called Lilith. In some Jewish and Christian traditions, Lilith was said to be Adam's first wife, created before Eve. When she refused to be subservient to Adam, she was cast out and became a demon who preyed on pregnant women and newborn babies. Lilith was said to come in the night, attacking women in their sleep, causing miscarriages, stillbirths, and infant deaths. Now, this legend is ancient, predating the medieval period by centuries, but the belief in Lilith and similar demons persisted into medieval times and beyond. In some Middle Eastern communities even today, pregnant women wear amulets for protection against evil spirits, a direct continuation of these ancient beliefs. Medieval Christian women might not have known the name Lilith, but they understood the concept. They knew that pregnancy made them vulnerable to supernatural attack. They knew that losing a baby could be blamed on evil influences during the night, and they took precautions accordingly, layering protections upon protections, combining Christian prayers with folk charms, wearing blessed medallions alongside iron amulets, doing everything possible to create a safe space for sleep. Can you imagine the psychological toll of this? You are already anxious about pregnancy and childbirth, already afraid of the very real medical dangers you face, and on top of that you have to worry about demons attacking you in your sleep. You have to perform protective rituals every night, checking and rechecking your defenses, lying awake wondering if tonight will be the night the mare comes for you. Some women, after experiencing a mare attack, developed such severe anxiety about sleep that they would try to stay awake as long as possible. There are accounts in medieval texts of people who dreaded falling asleep, who would sit up through the night hours, keeping vigil by the fire, only allowing themselves to doze off when dawn approached, because evil spirits were believed to lose their power in daylight. This sleep deprivation, of course, only made the problem worse. When you are severely sleep deprived, you are more likely to experience sleep paralysis and hypnagogic hallucinations. So a woman who had one mare attack and then tried to avoid sleep would be setting herself up for more attacks, creating a vicious cycle of fear and sleep disturbance. What we know now, what modern sleep science has taught us, is that sleep paralysis is a natural phenomenon, strange but not supernatural. It happens when your brain transitions between sleep stages in an unusual order. Normally, you lose consciousness and enter sleep before your body enters the paralyzed state of REM sleep. But sometimes the order gets mixed up. Your body enters REM paralysis while your mind is still partially conscious. The result is that you are awake and aware, but cannot move, exactly as Hildegard experienced. The hallucinations that often accompany sleep paralysis are also explainable. Your brain, in its confused state, tries to make sense of the physical sensations you are experiencing. The pressure on your chest from the paralyzed state of your breathing muscles gets interpreted as an external weight. The sense of fear and panic that naturally arises from being unable to move triggers the amygdala, the fear center of your brain, which then generates threatening imagery. You see demons, witches, dark figures, because your terrified brain is trying to explain why you feel threatened. Studies have shown that sleep paralysis is more common when you are sleep deprived, when you sleep on your back, when you are under stress, and yes, during pregnancy. So the medieval observations about risk factors were not entirely wrong, even if the explanations were mistaken. But knowing the scientific explanation does not make the experience less terrifying. Even today, with all our understanding, people who experience sleep paralysis often describe it as one of the most frightening things that has ever happened to them. The feeling of an evil presence, the crushing weight, the inability to cry out for help, these sensations are intense and primal, triggering deep fears that transcend rational understanding. So when we look back at medieval women like Hildegard, we should not dismiss their beliefs as mere superstition. They were trying to understand and cope with the genuinely terrifying experience using the conceptual framework available to them. They were doing their best to protect themselves and their families from something that felt like an attack. And you know what? Maybe their iron amulets and rosemary sprigs and protective prayers did help, not because they actually repelled demons, but because they provided psychological comfort. If you believe your iron knife will protect you, you might sleep more peacefully, less anxiously, and therefore be less likely to experience the sleep disruption that leads to paralysis in the first place. The placebo effect is powerful, and in the absence of effective medical treatments, sometimes belief itself is the best medicine available. Hildegard, our blacksmith's wife, will eventually sleep peacefully again. The mare does not return, and she credits her iron amulet and her nightly prayers. Whether the protection is real or perceived does not matter to her. She feels safe, and that safety allows her to rest. But we've been focusing on the extraordinary, the dramatic, the terrifying moments of medieval sleep. What about the ordinary nights? The quiet hours between the spectacular fears? What about that strange time between midnight and dawn when women lay awake during the watch, not attacked by demons, but simply existing in the liminal space between sleeps? That time held its own mysteries, its own dangers, its own peculiar magic, and it is where we are going next. There is something you need to understand about midnight in the medieval world. It was not just a time on a clock, not just the moment when one day becomes another. Midnight was a threshold, a doorway, a dangerous crossing between worlds. And for medieval women, lying awake during their watch, during that strange hour between first and second sleep, midnight was when the veil grew thin. We take you to a specific moment. It is the year 1325, sometime in early May, and you are a woman named Edith. You live in a village in rural England, and you have just woken from your first sleep. You can tell by the position of the moon through the small window that it is around 2 in the morning. This is normal. This is your watch, the time you always wake. But tonight feels different. Tonight, the air in your cottage seems heavier somehow, charged with something you cannot quite name. Your husband sleeps beside you, his breathing deep and steady. Your children are curled together at the foot of the bed, lost in their dreams. The fire has burned down to embers, casting barely any light. The cottage is almost completely dark. And in that darkness you hear something, a scratching sound, faint but distinct, coming from the door. Scratch, 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 like fingernails dragging across wood. Your heart begins to pound. You lie perfectly still, listening. The scratching continues. Scratch, scratch, scratch. And then it stops. Silence. Complete heavy silence that somehow feels worse than the sound itself. What is out there? Who or what is trying to get in? This is the reality of the witching hour for medieval women. The time between midnight and 3 in the morning was considered the most dangerous time of the night, the time when evil forces were strongest, when demons walked freely, when witches flew on their errands of malice, when the dead might rise from their graves. Why these hours specifically? Medieval theology had an answer. Christ was crucified at 3 in the afternoon, the 9th hour. Midnight to 3 in the morning was the inverse, the opposite, the mockery of that holy time. It was the devil's hour, when darkness held dominion and God's protection was believed to be at its weakest. The church itself reinforced these beliefs. Priests told their congregations that these were the hours when you were most vulnerable to spiritual attack, when you needed to be most vigilant in prayer, most careful to avoid sin or weakness that might open you to demonic influence. But it was not just demons that worried women like Edith. It was witches, real living women who were believed to have made pacts with the devil and gained supernatural powers as a result. These witches, according to the popular belief, could send their spirits out of their bodies during the night hours to spy on their neighbours, to cast curses, to cause harm. And May, the month when Edith hears that scratching at her door, was considered especially dangerous. May was the time of Beltane, an ancient pagan festival that marked the beginning of summer. Even though England had been Christian for hundreds of years by this point, old beliefs lingered, mixed with Christian teachings, creating a complex web of superstition and fear. During May, fertility spirits were said to roam the countryside. These were not necessarily evil spirits, but they were powerful and unpredictable. They could bless your crops and animals, or they could blight them. They could bring rain or drought. And if you offended them, if you failed to show proper respect, they might target you for misfortune. So Edith, lying in her bed at 2 a.m. in early May, hearing mysterious scratching at her door, has every reason to be afraid. Her mind races through possibilities. Is it a witch's spirit trying to enter her home? Is it a fertility spirit angry because she forgot to leave an offering? Is it something darker, more malevolent? She wants to wake her husband to ask him to get up and check the door, but she is also afraid to move, afraid to make any sound that might alert whatever is outside to her wakefulness. So she lies there, frozen, listening. The scratching starts again, scratch, scratch, scratch. Then a pause, then 3 more scratches. Edith's breath catches in her throat. 3 scratches 3 times. In folk belief, everything that comes in threes is significant, often related to the Holy Trinity, but sometimes used by dark forces as a mockery of that Trinity. What would you do in Edith's position? Would you lie there hoping the sounds would stop? Would you wake your husband? Would you pray? Edith chooses prayer. She begins, silently in her mind at first, reciting the Pater Noster, the Our Father. The Latin words, learned phonetically from countless church services, go through her thoughts like a protective shield. She makes the sign of the cross under the blankets, touching her forehead, her chest, her left shoulder, her right shoulder. The familiar gesture brings comfort, and slowly, gradually, the scratching stops. The heavy feeling in the air begins to lift. Edith continues praying, running through every prayer she knows, until finally she feels safe enough to drift back into her second sleep. In the morning she will discover that the scratching was probably just a branch from the old apple tree beside the cottage, swaying in the wind and brushing against the door. But in that moment, in the dark, vulnerable hours of the witching time, it felt like something far more sinister. This was the psychological landscape medieval women navigated every night. Every sound, every shadow, every unusual occurrence during those dangerous hours had potential supernatural significance. And women were considered especially vulnerable because of deeply held beliefs about female nature. Medieval theology taught that women were weaker than men, more susceptible to temptation, more easily led astray by evil forces. This belief went back to Eve in the Garden of Eden, whose weakness, according to Christian teaching, had brought sin into the world. Women were seen as spiritually fragile, their souls more permeable to dark influences. This was not just theological abstraction. It had real practical effects on how women experienced the night. If you believed you were more vulnerable to demonic attack than your husband sleeping beside you, would you not lie awake more often, more fearful, more alert to potential dangers? There were specific precautions women were advised to take during the witching hours. If you had to get up during your watch to use the chamber pot or tend to the fire, you should not go alone if possible. You should wake your husband or an older child to accompany you. Walking through your cottage in the dark alone during these hours was considered dangerous. If you absolutely had to go alone, you should carry something made of iron or wear an herb, like rosemary sewn into your sleeve. You should make the sign of the cross before leaving your bed. You should avoid looking out windows because you might see something walking past that you did not want to see. You should not speak aloud unless absolutely necessary, because your voice might attract attention from forces you would rather avoid. And there were certain nights that were considered even more dangerous than others. The night before May Day was one. The night of the winter solstice was another. Any night when the moon was new, when the sky was at its darkest. These were nights when cunning folk, the local healers and wise women, advised people to stay inside, to keep their doors and windows tightly closed, to mark their thresholds with protective symbols. What kind of symbols? A cross drawn in chalk above the door was common. Some people would pin branches of rowan or hawthorn to their door frames, both trees being associated with protection against evil. Others would scatter salt across their thresholds, salt being believed to repel malevolent spirits who could not cross it. In some regions, people practiced a ritual before bed on dangerous nights. They would walk around the inside perimeter of their home, sprinkling holy water if they had it, or blessed salt, or simply water that had been prayed over. This was meant to create a protective barrier, a boundary that dark forces could not cross. Now, you might be thinking this all sounds incredibly superstitious, and by modern standards, of course it is. But here is what I want you to consider. These beliefs and practices served a genuine psychological purpose. They gave people a sense of control in a world that was often terrifying and unpredictable. A medieval peasant woman had very little control over her life. She could not control the weather that determined whether her family would eat well or starve. She could not control diseases that might sweep through her village and kill her children. She could not control whether she would survive her next childbirth. She could not control political upheavals, wars, raids by bandits, or demands from her lord. But she could control her protective rituals. She could place iron under her pillow. She could pin rowan branches to her door. She could say her prayers correctly. These were actions within her power, small acts of agency that helped her feel less helpless in the face of vast, incomprehensible dangers. And honestly, is this so different from what people do today? We know rationally that checking that our doors are locked 3 times before bed does not actually make us safer than checking once. We know that keeping a baseball bat under the bed or a can of pepper spray in the nightstand drawer is more about feeling prepared than about realistic assessment of danger. We engage in our own protective rituals, our own ways of trying to feel safe in a world that can sometimes feel threatening. Medieval women did the same thing, just using the conceptual framework available to them. But let us return to the specific dangers of the witching hour. I mentioned witches, but I want to dig deeper into what this actually meant for women's nighttime experiences. Witch hunts would not reach their peak until the 16th and 17th centuries, but belief in witchcraft was already well established in medieval times. And here is something deeply disturbing. Women accused each other. Neighbour women, friends, even family members might suspect each other of witchcraft. If your cow suddenly stopped giving milk, if your child fell ill with no apparent cause, if you had a string of bad luck, you might begin to wonder if someone had cursed you, and your mind might turn to that neighbour woman who gave you an odd look last week, or that woman from the next village who mumbled something under her breath when you passed her on the road. During the witching hours, lying awake in the dark, these suspicions could grow and fester. Did you hear footsteps outside? Was that old widow from down the lane sending her spirit to spy on you? Did you see a shadow pass the window? Was that the woman who had argued with your husband at the market last month, come to cast a curse on your household? These fears were not abstract. They had real consequences. Women were sometimes ostracized from their communities, driven out of villages, or worse, based on suspicions of witchcraft. And the accusations often started with nighttime incidents, unexplained sounds or sights during those dangerous hours between midnight and dawn. There is a recorded case from 14th century France of a woman named Marie, who was accused of witchcraft after a neighbour reported seeing a shadowy figure outside Marie's cottage at 2 a.m. The neighbour claimed the figure was Marie's spirit, leaving her body to work mischief. Marie insisted she had been asleep the whole night, that the neighbour must have seen an animal or a trick of moonlight. But the accusation stuck, and Marie had to leave her village to escape persecution. Can you imagine being Marie? Can you imagine having your entire life upended because someone claimed to have seen something outside your home during the hours when you were asleep and could not prove your innocence? This is the world medieval women navigated. Not just the physical dangers of cold and discomfort and inadequate shelter, but the psychological and social dangers of a belief system that saw supernatural threats everywhere, especially in the dark hours of the night. And yet, for all the fear, for all the danger, those hours between midnight and dawn also held a certain strange beauty. When nothing bad was happening, when no scratching sounds disturbed the silence, when no evil spirits threatened, those hours could be peaceful, even sacred. Some women reported that during their watch, lying quietly in the dark, they felt closer to God than at any other time. The world was silent. The demands of daily life were suspended. It was just you and the darkness and the presence of the divine. Some of the most profound mystical experiences reported by medieval women happened during these nighttime hours. There were women who claimed to have visions during the watch, to have received messages from angels or saints. Whether these were genuine spiritual experiences, dreams that bled into wakefulness, or hallucinations brought on by sleep disruption and religious fervour, we cannot say. But to the women who experienced them, they were real and transformative. Julian of Norwich, a 14th century mystic, described having a series of intense visions of Christ during a severe illness. Many of these visions came at night during the quiet hours when she lay alone in her cell. She described feeling the presence of Jesus with her, speaking to her, revealing divine truths that she would later write down in what became one of the most important spiritual texts of the medieval period. So the witching hour was not only about fear, it was also about possibility, about the thinning of boundaries not just between the human world and the demonic, but also between the human and the divine. Edith, our peasant woman who heard scratching at her door, will have many more nights like this in her life. Some will be frightening, some will be peaceful, some will be simply boring hours of lying awake waiting for second sleep to claim her. But all of them will be shaped by the beliefs and fears and hopes of her culture, by the understanding that night is different from day, that some hours are more dangerous than others, that the darkness holds both threats and blessings. But fear and spiritual vulnerability were not the only challenges medieval women faced in the night. There were also purely physical challenges, elemental battles against cold and wet, and the intrusions of the natural world into their sleeping spaces. These struggles might seem more mundane than demons and witches, but for the women who fought them night after night, they were no less real, no less exhausting. And that is the world we are stepping into next. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine you are falling asleep right now. What do you feel? Maybe the softness of your mattress beneath you, the warmth of your blanket, the gentle hum of air conditioning or heating, keeping the temperature just right. Maybe you hear a bit of traffic outside or the quiet buzz of electronics. But overall you are comfortable, you are safe, you are in control of your environment. Now imagine something completely different. Imagine you are trying to fall asleep, but you cannot stop shivering. The cold is seeping up from the stone floor beneath you, creeping through the thin straw mattress, penetrating your blankets, settling into your very bones. Your feet are so cold they hurt, a sharp aching pain that makes you curl them up, trying to trap whatever tiny bit of warmth your body can generate. The air you breathe is thick with smoke, not the pleasant smell of a campfire, but harsh, choking smoke from a fire that is burning green wood, damp wood, anything that could be gathered. Your eyes water, your throat feels raw, you cough, and the coughing wakes the child sleeping beside you who starts to cry. And then, just as you are finally drifting off despite the cold and the smoke, you feel something, a drop of water, cold and startling, landing on your forehead, then another. You open your eyes and look up at the thatched roof above you, and in the dim light you can see moisture collecting on the underside of the thatch, forming droplets that fall one by one onto the people sleeping below. This is what it meant to sleep in a medieval peasant cottage. This is the reality for a woman named Gwen, who lives in rural Wales in the year 1350, and tonight, in the middle of January, is one of the hardest nights she has endured in a long time. Let me paint this picture for you in detail, because I think we have spent enough time on demons and witches and spiritual dangers. Now I want you to understand the sheer physical misery of trying to sleep in medieval conditions. Gwen's cottage is what historians call a longhouse. It is one room, about 30 feet long and 15 feet wide, with walls made of stone held together with mud mortar. The roof is thatched, made from bundles of reeds layered and tied to wooden beams. At one end of the cottage, Gwen and her family sleep. At the other end, separated by a low partition, the family's animals sleep. 3 sheep, a pig, and 2 chickens. Why do the animals live inside? 2 reasons. First, it keeps them safe from theft and predators, but second, and more importantly, their bodies generate heat. On a night like tonight, when the temperature outside has dropped below freezing, the warmth from those animal bodies makes a real difference to the human occupants of the cottage. But it also means the cottage smells like a barn. The ammonia stench of animal urine, the earthy smell of manure, the musky odour of wool and feathers and warm livestock. Gwen has lived with these smells her entire life, so she barely notices them anymore. But they are there, mixing with the wood smoke and the smell of unwashed human bodies and the damp, musty odour of wet thatch and stone. The fire, such as it is, burns in the centre of the room. Not in a fireplace, because the cottage does not have one. Just an open hearth, a circle of stones on the dirt floor with a hole in the roof above it to let the smoke out. Except the hole is not very large, and when the wind blows from certain directions, it actually pushes smoke back down into the cottage instead of letting it escape. Tonight, the wind is blowing from the north, strong and cold, and the smoke situation is bad. Gwen's eyes have been watering all evening. Her youngest child, a 2-year-old boy, has been coughing constantly, the harsh, smoky air irritating his small lungs. Gwen has tried everything she can think of to help, holding him upright so he can breathe more easily, giving him sips of water, even taking him outside briefly despite the freezing cold, hoping the fresh air would help. Nothing works for long. The fire must be kept burning, though. Without it, the cottage would be completely dark after sunset, and worse, it would be unbearably cold. So Gwen feeds it carefully, precious pieces of wood that her husband spent hours gathering and cutting, making each log last as long as possible. She knows that by midnight, the fire will have burned down to embers. By morning, it will be nearly out, and starting it again will require careful work with flint and tinder, coaxing a spark into flame, nursing that flame until it catches. Around 9 in the evening, Gwen and her family prepare for bed. Her husband closes the wooden shutters over the one small window in the cottage, securing them tightly. This keeps out some of the cold wind, but it also means that once the fire burns low, the cottage will be in complete darkness. Complete. The kind of darkness that people in the modern world almost never experience. The kind where you cannot see your hand in front of your face. The family climbs into their shared sleeping area, a platform raised slightly off the floor, covered with rushes, and then with a large sack stuffed with straw. This is their mattress. Over this they spread their blankets, 2 rough wool blankets that are thin and full of holes but are all they have. The sleeping arrangement is strategic. Gwen's eldest daughter, 13 years old, lies against the wall. Then the younger children arranged by age, then Gwen herself, then her husband on the outside edge. The theory is that the wall provides some protection from drafts, and the children in the middle are kept warmest by the bodies on either side of them. Everyone is wearing multiple layers of clothing. Gwen is wearing her undergown, her overgown, thick woolen hose, and a cap pulled low over her head. The children are similarly layered. They pull the blankets up to their chins and press close together, sharing body heat. And now, the long difficult battle to stay warm enough to sleep begins. The cold is relentless. It comes up from below, through the rushes and the straw and the thin blankets. It comes from the walls, which are little more than stone held together with mud, with cracks where the wind whistles through. It comes from above, where the thatched roof provides minimal insulation. Gwen can feel her feet going numb. She tucks them up, pressing them against her husband's legs, seeking warmth. He grumbles in his sleep but does not pull away. The children huddle close to her, and she wraps her arms around them, trying to share whatever warmth her body can provide. But then, around midnight, the rain starts. Gwen hears it first as a gentle pattering on the thatch above. Within minutes it becomes heavier, a steady drumming sound that fills the cottage. And then the inevitable happens. Water begins to seep through the thatch. Thatching, when new and properly maintained, is actually quite effective at shedding water. But Gwen's family cannot afford to rethatch their cottage every year. The reeds have been there for 3 years now, and they are beginning to rot. Gaps have formed. When it rains, water collects on the underside of the thatch in the cold night air, forming condensation. This moisture then drips down onto the people below. Drip. A cold droplet lands on Gwen's neck and runs down inside her undergown. She flinches but does not move otherwise. Drip. Another droplet, this time on her eldest daughter's face. The girl wipes it away but keeps her eyes closed, trying to stay asleep. Drip. 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 The drops come more frequently now. There is nothing Gwen can do except endure it. She cannot move the sleeping area. There is nowhere else to sleep in the one-room cottage. She cannot fix the roof in the middle of the night in the rain. She can only lie there, cold and damp, feeling the water slowly soaking into her clothes and bedding, making everything even colder than it already was. And then, as if the cold and the damp were not enough, something else disturbs the night. Rustling sounds from above, tiny clawed feet scurrying across the underside of the thatch. Mice, dozens of them, living in the dry layers of the thatched roof, coming out at night to search for food. These mice have been a problem all winter. They get into the family's small stores of grain, eating and contaminating the precious food. They drop bits of debris from the roof onto the sleeping family below. Bits of reed, dirt, their own droppings, all of it raining down periodically. Gwen has tried everything to discourage them. She has borrowed a cat from a neighbour, but the cat spent one night in the cottage and then refused to enter again, perhaps put off by the smoke or the smell or the presence of the larger animals. She has set traps, simple wooden boxes with bait inside, but the mice are clever and often steal the bait without triggering the trap. So the mice remain, invisible companions in the night. Their scratching and squeaking a constant reminder that Gwen does not even have full control of her own home. And there is more. Birds also nest in the thatch, small sparrows and finches seeking shelter from the winter cold. During the day they fly in and out through the smoke hole or gaps in the thatch. At night they roost in the reeds above, occasionally chirping or rustling, adding to the general cacophony of nocturnal sounds. Do you see why I wanted to tell you about this? Because this is the reality that existed alongside all the fears of demons and witches. Even if Gwen was not afraid of supernatural threats, even if she did not believe in the mare or evil spirits, she would still struggle to sleep. The purely physical challenges were immense. Think about what we take for granted. We sleep in beds that keep us elevated and cushioned. We sleep in rooms with solid walls and roofs that do not leak. We control the temperature with thermostats. We control the light with switches. We keep vermin out with screens and poison and professional exterminators. We have so much control over our sleeping environment that we have forgotten what it means to have none. Gwen has no control. She cannot make it warmer. She cannot stop the rain from dripping through the roof. She cannot evict the mice or the birds. She can only endure. Around 2 a.m, she wakes from her first sleep. Not because she wants to, but because her bladder is full and can no longer be ignored. She must get up and use the chamber pot, which is tucked in a corner of the cottage. This means climbing over her sleeping husband and children in complete darkness, feeling her way across the cold floor in her bare feet because she does not want to waste the candle stub they have saved for emergencies. She finds the chamber pot by touch and uses it, the sound seeming incredibly loud in the quiet cottage. While she is up, she adds a piece of wood to the fire, which has burned down to glowing coals. She blows on the coals gently, watching the orange glow brighten, feeling a tiny bit of warmth on her face. For just a moment, she crouches there by the fire, savouring this small warmth, delaying the moment when she must return to the cold, damp sleeping area. But she cannot stay there forever. Her feet are getting cold standing on the dirt floor. Her family needs her warmth. So she makes her way back, carefully climbing over her husband, settling back into her spot between her children and her husband. And she lies there, waiting for her second sleep to claim her. The rain continues to drip through the roof. The mice continue to scurry. The fire crackles softly. The pig snorts from its corner of the cottage. The wind howls around the walls. This is Gwen's lullaby. These are the sounds that accompany her into sleep. Not music, not silence, but the harsh symphony of medieval life. Now, compare Gwen's experience to what was happening that same night just 20 miles away in a manor house. Lady Catherine, whom we met earlier, is also preparing for bed. But her experience is so different it might as well be a different world. Lady Catherine's bedchamber is a separate room, not shared with animals or even with most of the household. She has a fireplace built into the wall, with a proper chimney to carry the smoke away. The fire is large and well stoked with seasoned wood that burns clean and hot. Servants have placed warmed stones wrapped in cloth at the foot of her bed, and they will replace these with fresh warm stones during the night if she rings a small bell kept beside the bed. Her windows have glass, expensive leaded glass that keeps out the wind while still letting in light during the day. At night, heavy tapestries are pulled across the windows for additional insulation. The floor is covered with rushes, but these are fresh rushes, replaced weekly, and they have been strewn with herbs that smell pleasant and repel insects. Her bed is enormous, piled with feather mattresses and covered with fur-lined blankets and silk coverlets. The bed curtains can be drawn closed, creating a warm, dark cocoon that holds in the heat from her body and from the bed-warming stones. Does Lady Catherine sleep easily? Does she rest peacefully through the night? Not necessarily, because comfort does not guarantee good sleep. Lady Catherine has her own troubles. She worries about political intrigues at court, about the health of her children, about her husband's business dealings. She sometimes lies awake for hours despite her luxurious bed, her mind racing with anxieties. But at least she lies awake in warmth and relative comfort. At least she is not being dripped on. At least she is not breathing smoke or listening to mice in her roof. The divide between rich and poor in terms of sleeping conditions was vast. But both rich and poor shared some experiences. Both felt the cold of winter, though to different degrees. Both had to manage fire, though some had proper fireplaces and others had open hearths. Both had to cope with the long dark nights, though some had more candles and oil lamps than others. And both, when they finally slept, when they managed to overcome all the physical discomforts and fall into slumber, experienced that strange and mysterious realm of dreams. Dreams that medieval people believed were not just random firings of neurons, but messages, visions, glimpses into other worlds. What did medieval women dream about during those long nights? What images visited them in sleep? What meanings did they assign to their dreams? And how did their understanding of dreams shape their waking lives? This is territory we have not yet explored, a landscape as rich and strange as anything we have encountered so far. Let us step into the dream world now. What was the last dream you remember? Can you recall it? Maybe it was strange and surreal, your brain mixing random memories and images into a story that made no sense. Maybe it was mundane, just a replay of your daily life. Maybe it was a nightmare that woke you in the middle of the night, heart pounding. Now, what if I told you that your dream was not just a dream? What if someone told you that it was a message, a warning, a glimpse into the future or into spiritual realms? Would you look at your dreams differently? Would you start paying more attention, trying to decode their meanings? This is exactly how medieval women experienced their dreams. Every dream was potentially significant. Every image, every symbol, every strange occurrence in the sleeping mind could be a message from God, from the saints, from angels. Or it could be a temptation from demons, a false vision meant to lead you astray. Dreams were not just entertainment for the sleeping brain, they were communications from another world. Let me tell you about a woman named Isabella. She lives in Italy in the year 1412, in a small town near Florence. Isabella is 34 years old, married to a cloth merchant, and she has just had a dream that has left her deeply shaken. In the dream, she was standing in her town's main church. The church was empty except for one figure kneeling before the altar, a woman dressed in blue robes. As Isabella walked closer, the woman turned around, and Isabella recognized her. It was the Virgin Mary herself, the Mother of Christ. Mary looked at Isabella with eyes full of sorrow and said, "Your sister is in danger. You must warn her." Then the vision faded, and Isabella woke up. Now, if you had this dream today, you might think it was just anxiety about your sister expressing itself in symbolic form, your brain creating drama while you slept. But Isabella does not think this. Isabella believes she has received a genuine message from the Virgin Mary, and she must act on it. The problem is that Isabella's sister lives in another town, a day's journey away. Isabella has not seen her in months. She has no reason to believe her sister is in any particular danger. But the dream was so vivid, so clear, so undeniably real that Isabella cannot ignore it. So she tells her husband about the dream. She tells her mother-in-law. She tells the priest at confession. And they all take it seriously. Because in medieval culture, dreams that occurred during that wakeful period between first and second sleep, or in the hours just before dawn, were considered especially significant. These were the times when the veil between worlds was thinnest, when divine messages could most easily reach the sleeping soul. The priest advises Isabella to travel to her sister to deliver the warning. Her husband agrees to let her make the journey, Even though travel is expensive and potentially dangerous, within 2 days, Isabella is on the road, compelled by a dream to check on her sister. When she arrives, she discovers that her sister is indeed facing a crisis. Not a physical danger, but an emotional one. Her sister's husband has been having an affair, and her sister is devastated, contemplating leaving him, unsure what to do. Isabella's arrival at this precise moment, her presence and support makes all the difference. The sisters pray together, talk together, and eventually find a path forward. Was the dream truly a message from Mary? Or was it Isabella's unconscious mind picking up on subtle clues in her sister's last letter? Tiny hints of unhappiness that Isabella's conscious mind had not registered? We cannot know, but to Isabella, the answer is clear. Mary spoke to her in a dream, and she listened, and good came of it. This kind of experience was common in medieval times. Dreams were taken seriously, analysed, discussed, prayed about, and women, interestingly, were often seen as particularly gifted dreamers, particularly receptive to divine messages through sleep. Why women specifically? Medieval theology taught that women were more emotional, more intuitive, more open to spiritual experiences than men. This was sometimes presented negatively as evidence of women's weakness and susceptibility to temptation. But it could also be framed positively. Women's very openness, their emotional receptivity, made them ideal vessels for divine communication. Some of the most important mystical visions in medieval Christianity came from women. Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century nun, experienced elaborate visions that she described in detailed writings and illustrations. Julian of Norwich received her famous revelations of divine love during a near-death illness, visions that came in a dreamlike state between sleeping and waking. Marjorie Kemper, whom we have mentioned before, reported frequent visions and conversations with Jesus that guided her spiritual life. These women were not dismissed as delusional or hysterical, at least not entirely. They were often taken seriously, their visions recorded and studied, their spiritual authority acknowledged even in a culture that generally denied women positions of formal power. But not all dreams were divine messages. Medieval people understood that there were different types of dreams, and only some were worth paying attention to. The most important classification system came from a 5th century writer named Macrobius, who wrote a commentary on an ancient Roman text about dreams. Macrobius divided dreams into 5 categories, and his system was widely known and used throughout the medieval period. First was the somnium, the enigmatic dream. This was a dream filled with strange shapes and symbols that concealed its meaning. These dreams required interpretation, needed someone wise to decode the imagery and reveal the hidden message. Second was the visio, the prophetic vision. This was a dream that showed events that would actually come to pass. No interpretation needed. The dream was a straightforward glimpse of the future. Third was the oraculum, the oracular dream. In this type of dream, a respected figure, a parent or priest or even God himself, appeared and clearly revealed what would happen or what action to take. These first 3 types were considered significant, worth remembering and analysing. But then there were 2 types that Macrobius dismissed as meaningless. The insomnium, which we translate as nightmare, was caused by mental or physical distress, anxiety about the future, indigestion, illness. These dreams were just your body and mind processing stress and discomfort, nothing divine about them. And finally, the visum, the apparition, was experienced in that twilight state between sleeping and waking. These were not true dreams, but hallucinations, tricks of the half-awake mind, also meaningless. So when a medieval woman had a dream, she had to figure out which type it was. Was it a prophetic vision that she should act on like Isabella's dream of Mary? Was it an oracular dream with a clear message? Or was it just a nightmare caused by eating too much rich food before bed? This interpretation was not always easy. Sometimes dreams were ambiguous, open to multiple readings, and this is where things could get complicated, even dangerous. Let me tell you about another woman, a peasant named Alice who lived in England in the 14th century. Alice had a recurring dream. In the dream, she saw her neighbour's cow dying. The same image night after night. The cow lying on its side, not moving, clearly dead. Alice did not know what to make of this dream. Was it a warning? Should she tell her neighbour? But what would she say? "I dreamed your cow's going to die, so be careful." That seemed both useless and potentially offensive, so Alice kept quiet. But then, a week later, the neighbour's cow actually did die, suddenly and without apparent cause, and the neighbour, hearing somehow that Alice had dreamed about this, became convinced that Alice had cursed the cow, that Alice was a witch who had killed the cow through some dark magic. No matter how much Alice protested that she had only dreamed about the cow's death, that she had not caused it, the suspicion stuck. She became known in the village as someone with strange powers, someone to be feared and avoided. This is the danger of dreams in medieval culture. They could empower you, give you spiritual authority, mark you as someone touched by the divine, or they could endanger you, mark you as someone touched by evil, someone trafficking with dark forces. And it was often women who walked this dangerous line. Men could have significant dreams too, of course. But women were more likely to be suspected of witchcraft, more likely to be accused of using dreams for malevolent purposes. Dreams were especially significant during that wakeful period between first and second sleep. Remember, during the watch your mind was in a unique state, relaxed but conscious, open to insights and reflections. Many people reported that when they fell back asleep after the watch, their dreams were more vivid, more memorable, more meaningful than at other times. There was even a practice mentioned in some medieval texts of trying to guide your dreams. Before falling into your second sleep, you would think about a question you needed answered, a problem you needed to solve. You would pray for guidance, asking God or the saints to send you a dream that would provide the answer. Then you would fall asleep, holding the question in your mind, hoping for a dream vision that would illuminate the path forward. Did this work? Well, think about how dreams function. Your sleeping brain processes your waking concerns, works through problems, makes unexpected connections. If you fall asleep thinking intensely about a question, there is a good chance your dreams will engage with that question in some way. Whether the answer comes from God or from your own subconscious problem solving, the practical effect is the same. You might wake up with new insight, a fresh perspective, a solution you had not consciously considered. Medieval women used their dreams for all sorts of purposes. Some women claimed to receive recipes in dreams, divine inspiration for healing remedies or culinary creations. Some received warnings about dangers, just like Isabella's dream about her sister. Some received comfort from dead loved ones, dreams where a deceased mother or child appeared to offer reassurance and love. And some women had dreams that changed the course of history. Joan of Arc in the 15th century claimed that she received visions and heard voices telling her to lead the French army against the English invaders. Were these visions dreams, hallucinations, genuine divine messages? Whatever their source, they were powerful enough to inspire Joan to action, to convince others to follow her, to alter the trajectory of the 100 Years' War. But most women's dreams were smaller, more personal. Dreams about everyday concerns, about family, about health, about the harvest, about neighbours and friendships. These dreams might not change history, but they shaped individual lives, influenced decisions, provided comfort or warning. And here is something beautiful. women shared their dreams with each other. In the moments between first and second sleep, lying in bed with their husbands or daughters beside them, women would sometimes whisper about their dreams. "Last night I dreamed about my mother," one might say. "She was young again and she was smiling." And her daughter would reply, "That is a good sign. It means she's at peace in heaven." Or women would gather during the day while working together at spinning or cooking or washing clothes, and they would talk about their dreams. They would help each other interpret the symbols, offer explanations, debate meanings. This was a form of community knowledge, shared wisdom, passed from woman to woman. There were even written dream dictionaries, though these were rare and expensive, accessible mainly to wealthy literate people. These books would list common dream symbols and their meanings. Dreaming of water meant emotional turmoil. Dreaming of bread meant abundance coming. Dreaming of losing teeth meant someone close to you would die. But most women relied not on books but on oral tradition, on the accumulated wisdom of their mothers and grandmothers and aunts. They learned which dreams to worry about and which to dismiss. They learned how to use dreams as tools for understanding their lives and making decisions. I find this incredibly moving, this trust that medieval women placed in their dreams, in a world where they had so little control, where their lives were shaped by forces beyond their influence. Their dreams were a space of possibility. In dreams, they could fly. They could be powerful. They could receive direct communication from the divine. They could glimpse the future. Dreams were democratic in a way that waking life was not. A peasant woman's dreams were just as valid, just as potentially significant as a noble woman's dreams. God could speak to anyone through any dream. Spiritual authority in the realm of sleep was not determined by your social class or wealth or education. Think about what that meant. A woman like Gwen, whom we met shivering in her smoky cottage, had nothing. No money, no property, no power, no education. But when she slept, when she dreamed, she had access to the same divine messages as a queen. Her dreams mattered. Her dream interpretations could influence her family's decisions. In this one realm she had authority. Of course, there were limits to this. A peasant woman could not claim to have received a vision telling her to challenge the authority of the church or the king. That would be heresy, rebellion, grounds for severe punishment. Dreams could empower women, but only within certain boundaries. Still, within those boundaries there was real power. And women knew it, treasured it, used it. Isabella, our merchant's wife who dreamed of Mary, became known in her community as someone who received true dreams. People started coming to her, asking if she had dreamed about them, seeking guidance based on her dream visions. She did not seek this role, but it found her, based on that one significant dream that led her to help her sister. She began to pay more attention to all her dreams, recording them in her memory, looking for patterns and messages. Some dreams seemed meaningless, just the mental clutter that Macrobius called nightmares, but others felt different, weighted with significance, demanding attention. And there were dreams that came not from divine sources, but from the strange superstitions that shaped medieval nighttime culture. Dreams about bizarre advice, peculiar folk wisdom, the accumulated beliefs of generations of women trying to control their fertility, their pregnancies, their children's health. This was a whole other world of nighttime belief, equally strange and fascinating, that shaped how medieval women tried to protect themselves and their families while they slept. Let us explore that world now in all its weird and wonderful complexity. I need to tell you about one of the strangest books I have ever encountered. It is called the Distaff Gospels, and it was written in the late 15th century somewhere in France or the Low Countries. The book claims to record the wisdom of a group of peasant women who gathered during the long winter nights to spin wool and share their knowledge about pregnancy, childbirth, marriage, and all the mysteries of women's lives. Now, here is what makes this book absolutely fascinating. The advice these women give is completely bonkers. I mean, truly, wonderfully, bewilderingly bizarre. And yet reading it gives us an incredible window into what ordinary medieval women believed, what they told each other in whispered conversations, what folk wisdom they passed down from generation to generation. And a surprising amount of this wisdom relates to sleep, to what you did or did not do at bedtime, to the consequences of your sleeping arrangements for your future children. Let me share some of these beliefs with you, and I want you to imagine hearing these from your own grandmother or your neighbour, women you trust, women who have successfully raised children and navigated the dangers of medieval life. Would you follow their advice? Even if it sounded strange, here is the first one, and I promise I am not making this up. According to the Distaff Gospels, if you sleep with a man who has dirty or smelly feet, your child will be smelly their whole life. The text specifically warns that if the child is a boy, he will have smelly feet too, just like his father. Can you imagine? You're a young bride preparing for your wedding night, and some well-meaning older woman pulls you aside and says, "Now dear, before you get into bed with your new husband, make sure his feet are clean. Wash them yourself if you have to, because if his feet stink on the night you conceive a baby, that child will smell bad forever." Would you believe this? Would you insist your husband wash his feet before bed every single night just in case this was the night you conceived? Many medieval women apparently did believe it. And here is the thing. This advice, ridiculous as it sounds, comes from a genuine concern about children's health and well-being. Medieval people did not understand genetics or heredity the way we do. They did not know about dominant and recessive traits or chromosomes, but they observed that children often resembled their parents, and they developed theories to explain this. One theory was that whatever was happening at the moment of conception directly influenced the child. Your state of mind, your physical condition, the circumstances of the encounter, all of it could shape the baby that resulted. So if you wanted a healthy, pleasant-smelling child, you needed to ensure the moment of conception was as clean and pure as possible. Here is another gem from the Distaff Gospels. If you want to have a boy, you need to make sure your husband turns his face toward the east during the marital act. East, the direction of the rising sun, was associated with masculine energy, with strength and power. So facing east would somehow encourage the conception of a male child. Alternatively, the text suggests, the woman herself could clench her fist while nature took its course. A clenched fist, apparently, also promoted male offspring. Why? Your guess is as good as mine, but medieval women were desperate to bear sons, who were valued more highly than daughters, who could inherit property and carry on the family name, so they would try anything, even something as seemingly pointless as making a fist. And if you wanted a daughter, the advice was to engage in marital relations in the evening rather than the morning. Morning was masculine, associated with activity and energy. Evening was feminine, associated with rest and receptivity. So the time of day could influence the gender of your child. None of this makes any biological sense, of course. We know now that the gender of a child is determined by which sperm cell fertilizes the egg, and no amount of fist clenching or eastward facing or evening timing will change that. But medieval women did not know this. They were working with the knowledge available to them, trying to exert control over a process that seemed mysterious and unpredictable. But the sleep-related advice gets even stranger. The Distaff Gospels warns pregnant women about what they should and should not do at bedtime, and the consequences are dire. For instance, do not eat a hare's head while pregnant, because if you do, your child will be born with a split lip. This belief persisted for centuries and reflects a medieval understanding of what we now call cleft palate, a birth defect that was common enough that people noticed it and tried to explain it. The logic here is based on what historians call the doctrine of signatures, the idea that things that look similar have some mystical connection. A hare's split lip resembles a cleft palate, so eating hare must somehow cause cleft palate in babies. It makes a kind of symbolic sense, even though it has no basis in reality. Or this one: if someone throws strawberries at a pregnant woman's face, the baby will be born with red marks on their body. Again, the connection is visual. Strawberries are red and spotty, therefore they cause red spots on babies. This belief about strawberry birthmarks persisted well into the modern era. These warnings created a kind of paranoia around pregnancy. Every action, every food, every experience could potentially harm your unborn child. Going to sleep became a time of special concern because sleep was when you were vulnerable, when your guard was down, when mysterious forces could act upon your body. Some women were so worried about accidentally harming their babies through some unknown violation of folk wisdom that they struggled to sleep at all. Imagine lying in bed pregnant, running through a mental checklist. Did I eat anything I should not have eaten? Did someone say something to me that might have cursed the baby? Did I look at something ugly that might make my baby ugly? The stakes were so high. Infant mortality was catastrophic. Many babies did not survive their first year, and when a baby was born with problems, with deformities or weaknesses, parents desperately searched for explanations. What had they done wrong? What rule had they violated? The folk wisdom preserved in the Distaff Gospels gave them answers, even if those answers were wrong. It is the strawberries, they could say. It is because the father had dirty feet. It is because we conceived on the wrong phase of the moon. These explanations were not accurate, but they provided a sense of causation, a narrative that helped people make sense of tragedy. And here is something that strikes me as deeply human. Modern pregnant women do the same thing, just with different content. We are told not to eat soft cheese or drink alcohol or sleep on our backs in late pregnancy or take hot baths. Some of this advice is scientifically sound, based on real risks, but some of it is overly cautious or based on preliminary studies or simply cultural superstition dressed up in medical language. And when something goes wrong with a pregnancy, modern women often torment themselves with questions. Was it that glass of wine I had before I knew I was pregnant? Was it the stress at work? Was it something I ate? We seek explanations just like medieval women did, and we blame ourselves just like they did. The difference is that we have more accurate information about what actually causes problems, but the fundamental human impulse, the need to understand and to feel some measure of control, that has not changed. Let me share one more piece of advice from the Distaff Gospels, and this one specifically relates to sleeping arrangements. The text warns that if a nun and a priest have a child together, that child will have all kinds of problems. The text does not specify what problems, just vaguely warns that breaking vows of celibacy produces damaged offspring. This is not folk wisdom about nutrition or conception technique. This is moral judgment wrapped in pseudo-medical language. The message is clear. Sexual sin produces damaged children. This belief served a social function, reinforcing the importance of marriage and chastity, warning people that violations of sexual norms would be punished through their children's suffering. And yet, despite all these dire warnings, despite all the rules and restrictions and superstitions, medieval women still managed to conceive and bear children. The human reproductive drive is strong enough to overcome even the most elaborate system of folk taboos. But what about the women who struggle to conceive? What advice did the Distaff Gospels offer for infertility? Here is where things get really interesting because some of the advice relates specifically to nighttime rituals and sleeping practices. One recommendation was to sleep with certain herbs under your pillow. Yarrow was believed to promote fertility. So was lady's mantle, a plant whose leaves collect dewdrops in a way that resembles a woman's womb holding water. A woman hoping to conceive might gather these herbs, dry them, sew them into a small cloth pouch, and tuck it under her pillow at night, hoping the herb's essence would somehow influence her body while she slept. Did this work? Well, no, not in any direct physiological way, but here is something to consider. Stress and anxiety can genuinely affect fertility. Women who are desperately worried about their inability to conceive sometimes have trouble conceiving precisely because of that worry. So if tucking herbs under your pillow gave you peace of mind, made you feel like you were doing something to help, that relaxation might actually improve your chances. The placebo effect is powerful. Belief can influence physiology in ways that still surprise modern researchers. So maybe the herbs under the pillow helped, not because of any magical properties, but because they helped the woman sleep more peacefully, more hopefully. There were also prayers to be said at bedtime for women hoping to conceive, special invocations to St. Anne, Mother of the Virgin Mary, who was the patron saint of fertility and conception. A woman might kneel beside her bed before climbing in, saying the prayer 3 times, asking St. Anne to intercede with God on her behalf. And here is what moves me about these practices. They gave women something to do. In a world where fertility's treatments did not exist, where the causes of infertility were completely unknown, where you had almost no control over whether or not you could have children, these little rituals provided a sense of agency. You could control the herbs under your pillow. You could control whether or not you said the prayer. You could control your husband's foot hygiene on the night of conception. These tiny actions gave you the feeling that you were not completely powerless, that your choices mattered, that you had some influence over your fate. I think about a woman named Maud living in England in the 15th century who has been married for 3 years and has not yet conceived. Every night she places her herb pouch under her pillow. Every night she says her prayer to St. Anne. Every night she makes sure her husband's feet are clean. She does everything the older women have told her to do, follows every piece of advice from the Distaff Gospels. Will she conceive? Maybe, maybe not. The herbs and prayers will not directly cause conception, but they give Maud hope, and hope keeps her trying, keeps her engaging with her husband, keeps her believing that motherhood is still possible. And if she does eventually conceive, she will credit the herbs and the prayers. She will tell other women about what worked for her. She will become one of those older, wiser women passing down folk wisdom to the next generation. Here is what you must do, she will say. Sleep with herbs under your pillow and pray to St. Anne, and make sure your husband washes his feet. The cycle continues. The folk wisdom perpetuates itself, not because it is accurate, but because it is comforting, because it provides a framework for understanding and acting in a world full of uncertainty. And you know what? I do not think we should mock this. Yes, the specific beliefs are wrong. No, clenching your fist does not determine your baby's gender. But the impulse behind these beliefs, the desperate desire to protect your children and control your reproductive fate, that is universal and timeless. Medieval women were doing the best they could with the information available to them. They were creating systems of meaning and action that helped them navigate one of the most dangerous and mysterious aspects of human life. They were supporting each other, sharing knowledge, trying to help each other survive and thrive. The Distaff Gospels ends with a kind of blessing, a wish that all women might bear healthy children and raise them successfully. It is a beautiful sentiment, coming at the end of all the bizarre advice, a reminder that underneath the strangeness was genuine care and concern. But we have focused so much on conception and pregnancy and childbirth. What about the women who could not fall asleep at all? What about those who lay awake hour after hour, tormented by worries or physical pain or racing thoughts? Medieval women suffered from insomnia just like people do today, and they developed their own remedies and rituals to try to find rest. That is the territory we are moving into now, the quiet desperation of the sleepless medieval woman and what she did to try to find peace in the night. Listen to this silence with me for just a moment. Can you hear it? That deep, quiet emptiness of the night. Now imagine lying in that silence for hours, your mind racing, your body exhausted but unable to rest, watching the darkness slowly give way to the first grey light of dawn, knowing you have not slept at all. This is insomnia, and if you have experienced it, you know it is one of the most frustrating, most desperate conditions imaginable. You are tired, so tired, but sleep will not come. Your mind spins with worries and thoughts you cannot control. You watch the night pass, minute by agonizing minute, and you know that tomorrow you will be exhausted, unable to function properly, and yet you still cannot sleep. Now imagine experiencing this in the medieval world, where you had no sleeping pills, no cognitive behavioral therapy, no sleep clinics or doctors who specialized in sleep disorders. All you had were folk remedies, prayers, and the sympathy of other women who had suffered the same affliction. Let me introduce you to a woman named Cecilia. She lives in a town in northern England in the year 1390. Cecilia is 41 years old, a widow who runs a small bakery that her late husband left to her. She has 3 grown children, all married and living their own lives. By medieval standards, Cecilia has done well for herself. She is independent, financially secure, respected in her community. But for the past 6 months, Cecilia has barely slept. It started gradually. At first, she would simply lie awake for an hour or so during her usual watch time between first and second sleep. That was normal enough. But then the wakeful period started getting longer. 2 hours, 3 hours. Soon she was lying awake for most of the night, only falling into a light, restless doze in the hours before dawn. Now she barely sleeps at all. She lies in her bed, alone since her husband's death 5 years ago, staring into the darkness, her mind churning endlessly. She thinks about her business, about whether she is charging enough for her bread, about the young man who works for her and whether he is stealing from her. She thinks about her children, worrying that her eldest son drinks too much, that her daughter's husband is not treating her well, that her youngest is not attending church as often as he should. She thinks about her own mortality. At 41, she is already older than many people in her town. How much longer does she have? Will she die alone in this house with no one to care for her? What will happen to her business after she is gone? Round and round these thoughts go, an endless spiral of anxiety and fear, and sleep will not come to rescue her from them. Have you ever had nights like this? Nights where your brain simply will not shut off, where every worry and fear seems magnified in the darkness? If so, you understand exactly what Cecilia is experiencing. But Cecilia lives in a time when insomnia is not just a medical problem. It is understood as a spiritual problem, a sign that something is wrong with your soul as much as with your body. Medieval medicine taught that sleep was governed by the humours, those 4 bodily fluids that supposedly determined health and temperament. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. When these were in balance, you slept well. When they were out of balance, sleep became disturbed. Insomnia specifically was associated with an excess of black bile, the humour linked to melancholy and sadness. A person suffering from insomnia was thought to have too much black bile in their system, creating mental disturbance, anxiety, and sleeplessness. But beyond the physical humours, there were also the passions of the soul to consider. Medieval medicine recognised 6 non-natural things that affected health. These were air, food and drink, exercise and rest, sleep and waking, retention and excretion, and the passions and emotions. That last category was crucial for understanding insomnia. Your emotional state directly affected your ability to sleep. Worry, grief, anger, fear, all of these passions could disturb the natural sleep cycle, and for women especially, emotions were seen as particularly powerful and difficult to control. Cecilia knows all this. The local physician, when she consulted him, told her that her insomnia comes from excessive worry and an imbalance of her humours. He prescribed several remedies. First, bloodletting. The physician opened a vein in Cecilia's arm and drained what seemed like an alarming amount of blood into a bowl. The theory was that removing some blood would help rebalance her humours, reducing the excess of black bile that was causing her melancholy and sleeplessness. Did this help? No. If anything, Cecilia felt weaker afterward, more light-headed and fragile. But the physician assured her this was normal, part of the healing process. Second, dietary changes. Cecilia was told to avoid certain foods that were believed to promote black bile. Lentils, rabbit meat, cabbage, anything that was dark or earthy. She was encouraged to eat lighter, warmer foods. Chicken, white bread, sweet wine, anything associated with blood and yellow bile, rather than black bile. Cecilia tried this. She changed her entire diet, even though it was expensive and difficult, but still she could not sleep. Third, herbal remedies. The physician gave her a tincture made from valerian root, lettuce seeds, and poppy. She was to drink this mixed with wine before bed. Valerian has mild sedative properties, and poppy, of course, contains opium. This remedy actually did help a bit. Cecilia would feel drowsy after drinking it, heavy and relaxed. Sometimes she would manage a few hours of sleep, but the effects were inconsistent. Some nights the tincture worked, some nights it did not, and Cecilia worried about becoming dependent on it, worried about the cost of continuing to purchase it from the physician. So she turned to other remedies, ones that did not require a physician's expensive intervention. Folk remedies that her mother and grandmother had used, that her neighbours recommended, that the wise woman at the edge of town whispered about. One remedy involved listening to soothing sounds. Cecilia would lie in bed and focus on the sound of water trickling, imagining a stream flowing over smooth stones. Some people actually arranged for water to trickle over shells near their bed, creating a gentle rhythmic sound meant to lull the mind into sleep. Cecilia could not arrange this, but she could imagine it, could hear the sound in her mind, and sometimes this helped. Another remedy was a warm bath before bed. Not easy to arrange in medieval times, when heating enough water for a full bath required hours of labour. But Cecilia would sometimes heat a basin of water and soak her feet and hands, letting the warmth relax her muscles, calm her racing thoughts. Herbal baths were even better. Adding chamomile, lavender, or linden flowers to the water was believed to promote sleep. The warm water combined with the scent of the herbs created a multisensory experience that could genuinely help induce relaxation. There were also prayers, specific prayers for sleep. Cecilia would kneel beside her bed before lying down and pray to God for rest. She would ask the Virgin Mary to intercede for her, to grant her the peace she needed to sleep. She would recite psalms, letting the familiar words calm her mind. And there were saints associated with sleep problems. Saint Bartholomew was one. His relics, housed in the town of Yarmouth, were said to cure insomnia. Some people made pilgrimages to sleep near his relics, hoping for a miracle cure. Cecilia considered making such a pilgrimage. But Yarmouth was far away, the journey dangerous and expensive, and she could not leave her business unattended for that long. So she prayed to St. Bartholomew from her own bed, hoping that prayer alone might be enough. But here is what medieval physicians understood, and this is actually quite sophisticated. They recognized that treating insomnia required more than just physical remedies. They understood that the mind and emotions had to be addressed as well. One medieval medical text recommends that insomnia sufferers spend time before bed in pleasant conversation, listening to soothing music, thinking about agreeable things. Avoid disturbing thoughts, the text advises. Avoid arguments or stressful topics in the evening hours. This is remarkably similar to modern sleep hygiene advice. We are told not to look at screens before bed, not to engage in stimulating activities, to create a calm, peaceful environment that promotes sleep. Medieval people did not have screens to avoid, but they understood the same basic principle. What you do before bed affects how well you sleep. Another recommendation was to keep the bedroom at a comfortable temperature, not too hot and not too cold, to ensure the bed was comfortable, with adequate cushioning and blankets, to make sure the room was dark and quiet. All of this sounds sensible and modern, but medieval people had very limited ability to actually implement these recommendations. Cecilia cannot control the temperature of her bedroom. She has no thermostat, no central heating. She can add more blankets if she is cold, but if she is too warm, there is little she can do, except remove blankets and suffer. She cannot make her room completely dark. The moon shines through her small window, and she has no curtains thick enough to block it completely. She cannot make it quiet. The sounds of the town filter in. Dogs barking, people walking past, the occasional shout or laugh from the tavern down the street. So Cecilia lies there, doing her best to follow the physician's advice, but hampered at every turn by the limitations of her medieval environment. And there is another factor we have not discussed yet, something that made insomnia particularly difficult for women: social isolation. Cecilia sleeps alone. Since her husband's death, she has had no one to share her bed, no one to whisper to in the dark, no one to provide comfort when she cannot sleep. In medieval culture, sleeping alone was unusual and often lonely. Most people slept with family members or, in the case of servants, with other servants. Communal sleeping was the norm, so a widow like Cecilia, sleeping by herself, was deprived of the comfort and companionship that most people took for granted. There were nights when Cecilia's loneliness felt worse than her insomnia. She would lie there, remembering her husband sleeping beside her, remembering the warmth of his body, the sound of his breathing. That companionship, that simple presence of another human being, had made the night feel less vast, less empty. Now the night stretches endlessly and she is alone with her thoughts. Medieval literature actually explores this connection between insomnia and emotional suffering. There is a whole genre of dream vision poetry written mostly by men, but reflecting universal human experiences, that begins with the narrator suffering from terrible insomnia caused by emotional distress. Geoffrey Chaucer's Book of the Duchess begins with the narrator describing 8 years of insomnia caused by an unrequited love. He is so desperate for sleep that he will try anything. He picks up a book and reads to distract himself, and only then, after reading a story about loss and mourning, does he finally fall asleep and have the dream that makes up the rest of the poem. The message is clear. Insomnia is not just a physical problem. It is a symptom of unprocessed emotion, unresolved grief, the soul's inability to find peace. Cecilia eventually figures out what is keeping her awake. It is not just worry about her business or her children, it is grief. Unprocessed, unacknowledged grief for her husband who died 5 years ago, but whose absence she has never fully mourned. Medieval culture expected widows to move on quickly, to be strong and practical. Cecilia threw herself into running the bakery, into being independent and capable. She did not allow herself time to grieve properly, and now, years later, that grief has caught up with her, manifesting as insomnia, as anxiety, as a mind that will not rest. Once Cecilia recognizes this, once she allows herself to grieve, to cry, to acknowledge her loss, her sleep begins to improve. Not immediately, not magically, but gradually. She starts sleeping for a few hours a night, then longer periods. Eventually she returns to something close to her normal sleep pattern. The remedies helped, the herbal tincture, the warm baths, the prayers. But what really healed her was finally dealing with the emotional wound that had been festering beneath her insomnia. This is wisdom that medieval physicians understood, even if they expressed it in different terms than we would use today. They knew that the accidents of the soul, the passions and emotions, had to be treated alongside the body. They prescribed baths and herbs, yes, but they also prescribed pleasant conversation, soothing music, resolution of emotional conflicts. This holistic approach to sleep problems is something we have, in some ways, lost and are now rediscovering. Modern sleep medicine is beginning to recognize that treating insomnia often requires more than just pills. It requires addressing anxiety, depression, unresolved trauma, poor coping strategies. It requires treating the whole person, not just the symptom. Medieval medicine, for all its flaws and misconceptions, understood this. And women like Cecilia, lying awake in the medieval night, discovered through their own suffering what modern research is now confirming, that sleep is not separate from the rest of our lives, that what happens in our waking hours affects our sleeping hours, that true rest requires peace of mind as much as a comfortable bed. We have travelled through so many aspects of medieval women's sleep now. We have seen the cold and the boke, the demons and the dreams, the fears and the remedies. We have watched women struggle through difficult nights and find small moments of peace. But what does all of this mean? What can we, living in our modern world with our own sleep problems and challenges, learn from these medieval experiences? That is where we are heading now, to tie together all these threads, to understand what the past can teach us about the present, and maybe even about the future. So here we are, at the end of our long journey through the medieval night. We have spent hours together, you and I, walking through dark cottages and cold castle chambers, listening to women's prayers and fears, witnessing their struggles and their small triumphs. And now, as our story draws to a close, I want to ask you something. What have we really learned? What does any of this matter for your life right now in the 21st century, lying in your comfortable bed with your temperature-controlled room and your electric lights? The answer might surprise you, because I think medieval women knew things about sleep that we have forgotten, and I think we are just now, after centuries of industrialization and artificial light and 8-hour work schedules, beginning to remember those truths. Let me take you back one more time to that core discovery we made at the very beginning of this journey. The two-sleep pattern, that natural rhythm of sleeping in two phases with a wakeful period between. For thousands of years, this was how humans slept. It was normal. It was expected. It was built into the structure of the night. And then, in just a few generations, we erased it. We decided that sleep should be continuous, efficient, uninterrupted. We treated waking in the middle of the night as a disorder, something to be fixed with medication or therapy. But what if we are wrong? What if millions of people today who think they have insomnia, who lie awake at 2 a.m. feeling broken and frustrated, what if they are actually experiencing something completely natural? What if their bodies are trying to return to an ancient pattern and we are fighting against our own biology? I am not saying everyone should immediately switch to biphasic sleep. Our modern world does not easily accommodate waking in the middle of the night for an hour or two. Jobs start at specific times. Alarm clocks jar us awake whether we are rested or not. We have lost the flexibility that medieval life, for all its hardships, allowed. But maybe, just maybe, we can stop treating middle-of-the-night wakefulness as an enemy. Maybe we can learn from medieval women like Agnes and Beatrice and Cecilia, who understood that the watch was not a problem to be solved but a space to be inhabited. A time for prayer, for reflection, for quiet thought. If you wake at 2 in the morning and cannot immediately fall back asleep, try this. Do not panic. Do not reach for your phone. Do not turn on bright lights and start scrolling through social media, filling your mind with news and stimulation. Instead, lie there in the darkness. Breathe slowly. Let your thoughts wander. Maybe say a little prayer even if you are not religious. Maybe just acknowledge the quiet beauty of being awake when the rest of the world sleeps. This was the gift of the medieval watch. Not sleep itself, but a different kind of rest. A rest for the soul, if not the body. And here is another thing medieval women understood. Sleep is communal. It is relational. It happens in the context of family, of connection, of physical presence. Now, I am not suggesting we all go back to sleeping 7 people to a bed. I treasure my privacy and my personal space as much as anyone. But I do think we have lost something by making sleep so solitary, so isolated. We sleep alone in separate rooms, sometimes even separate beds from our partners. We see sleep as an individual activity, something we do by ourselves, for ourselves. Medieval women slept surrounded by the people they loved. They heard their children breathing. They felt their husband's warmth. They knew, even in sleep, that they were not alone. And that presence, that connection, provided a kind of comfort and security that we rarely experience now. Maybe we cannot recreate medieval sleeping arrangements, but maybe we can think more intentionally about connection before bed. A few minutes of quiet conversation with our partner, checking on our children, watching them sleep peacefully, even just calling a friend or family member before turning in for the night. These small acts of connection can change how we experience sleep, making it less lonely, less aqueous. Medieval women also understood that sleep requires darkness, real darkness, the kind of complete darkness that is almost impossible to find in modern life, where streetlights and electronic devices and LED indicators fill our nights with artificial light. We know now from sleep science that exposure to light suppresses melatonin production and disrupts our circadian rhythms. We are supposed to sleep in darkness. Our biology demands it, but we have filled our world with light, and we wonder why we cannot sleep well. Gwen, sleeping in her dark cottage with only the dying embers of the fire providing a faint glow, slept in the kind of darkness our bodies are designed for. She did not choose this darkness. She had no other option, but inadvertently her lack of artificial light created ideal conditions for sleep. We can learn from this. We can choose darkness, turn off the television, put away the phone, cover the LED lights on your electronics, invest in blackout curtains if you need them. Create a sleeping environment that respects your body's need for darkness. And what about the spiritual dimension of medieval sleep? The prayers, the rituals, the sense that nighttime was a sacred space. You do not have to be religious to appreciate this. The act of creating a bedtime ritual, of marking the transition from day to night, of intentionally preparing your mind and body for sleep. This is powerful. Medieval women did not just collapse into bed whenever exhaustion overcame them. They prepared, they prayed, they created a threshold between waking and sleeping. What would your bedtime ritual look like? Maybe it is reading a few pages of a book. Maybe it is writing in a journal. Maybe it is simply sitting quietly for 5 minutes, reviewing your day, releasing your worries. The specific content matters less than the intention, the act of creating a boundary between day and night. Medieval women also understood something we have forgotten about suffering and endurance. They faced challenges we cannot imagine. The cold, the discomfort, the danger, the fear. They did not have the option to eliminate all discomfort from their sleeping experience. They simply had to endure, and there is a kind of strength in that. Not that we should romanticize suffering or pretend that hardship is good, but there is something to be said for acceptance, for learning to be okay with less than perfect conditions, for not demanding complete control over every aspect of our environment. We live in a culture that promises perfect sleep if we just buy the right mattress, the right pillow, the right white noise machine, the right sleep tracker. We are told that we should never be uncomfortable, that any discomfort is a problem that needs a solution, preferably a solution we can purchase. But medieval women teach us a different lesson. Sometimes you just have to be a little cold, a little uncomfortable, and that's okay. You will still survive. You will still sleep eventually. And maybe, just maybe, accepting some discomfort makes us more resilient, more adaptable, more human. Now, let me be clear, I'm not saying we should reject modern comforts. I am grateful for my warm house and my comfortable bed. I do not want to sleep on a straw mattress in a smoky cottage, and neither do you. Progress is real. The improvements in sleeping conditions over the past few centuries have reduced suffering and improved health, but I do think we can learn from medieval women's acceptance, their resilience, their ability to find rest even in difficult circumstances. When we cannot get conditions exactly right, when the room is a bit too warm or we hear noise from the street or our mattress is not quite perfect, we can remember Gwen and Hildegard and Cecilia, who slept through far worse and still managed to rest, to dream, to wake each morning and face another day. There is one more lesson, perhaps the most important one. Medieval women understood that sleep problems are often symptoms of deeper issues. Insomnia was not just about humours and bloodletting, it was about grief, anxiety, unresolved emotions, spiritual distress. True rest required peace of mind as much as a comfortable bed. We are rediscovering this truth now. Modern sleep medicine is moving away from simply prescribing pills and toward addressing the underlying psychological and emotional factors that disrupt sleep. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia recognizes what medieval physicians knew, that you cannot treat sleep in isolation from the rest of a person's life. If you struggle with sleep, maybe the problem is not your bedroom or your mattress or your sleep schedule. Maybe the problem is worry you have not processed, grief you have not allowed yourself to feel, anxiety you have not addressed. Maybe, like Cecilia, you need to do some emotional work before your body will let you rest. And that work is hard. It requires honesty, vulnerability, maybe professional help. But it is worth it, because sleep is not something you can force or fake. Your body knows when your soul is not at peace, and it will not let you rest until you address what is wrong. So here we are, at the end of our journey. We have travelled through 12 centuries of women's nights, witnessed their fears and hopes, their suffering and resilience. We have seen how they slept, what they wore, what they feared, what they dreamed. And what strikes me most after all of this is how much we share with these medieval women. The circumstances are different, the explanations are different, but the fundamental human experience of trying to find rest in a difficult world, that is the same. We all struggle with sleep sometimes. We all lie awake worrying. We all seek comfort and safety in the night. We all hope to wake refreshed and ready to face another day. Medieval women did not have the advantages we have, but they had something we have lost. A rhythm of life that respected natural darkness and light, a communal approach to sleep that valued connection over privacy, a spiritual framework that gave meaning to the night. We cannot go back to medieval times, and we should not want to, but we can learn from them. We can take the wisdom they gained through centuries of experience and apply it to our modern lives. We can choose darkness when we need it. We can create meaningful bedtime rituals. We can stop fighting our body's natural rhythms. We can address our emotional and spiritual needs, not just our physical comfort. And maybe, just maybe, we can sleep a little better. Not perfectly. Medieval women did not sleep perfectly either, but well enough, peacefully enough, with enough rest to face whatever tomorrow brings. So tonight, when you lie down to sleep, remember the women we have met on this journey. Remember Agnes waking naturally at midnight for her watch. Remember Margaret arranging her children carefully in the family bed. Remember Beatrice praying for a safe delivery. Remember Hildegard surviving the mare's attack. Remember Gwen enduring the cold and the damp. Remember Isabella acting on her prophetic dream. Remember Cecilia finally finding peace after years of insomnia. They are gone now, these medieval women. Their bones are dust, their cottages and castles have crumbled, but their experiences echo through the centuries, connecting us to them, reminding us that the night has always been a place of mystery and challenge, and sometimes surprising grace. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Thank you for listening to these stories, for imagining these lives, for spending these hours exploring the medieval night. I hope you have found it fascinating, maybe even a little bit helpful for your own sleep. And I hope that tonight, when you close your eyes and drift into sleep, you do so with a new appreciation for the gift of rest, the mystery of dreams, and the long human history of trying to find peace in the darkness. Sleep well, my friends, and if you wake in the middle of the night, do not be afraid. You are in good company. Medieval women woke too, and they survived, and so will you. Until next time, may your nights be peaceful and your dreams be sweet. I will be here, waiting with more stories, more history, more journeys into the past. Because there are so many more tales to tell, so many more mysteries to explore. But for now, rest. You have earned it. Good night.